evening. I'll call this meeting to order, our special meeting for a workshop of the North Harris County Regional Water Authority. It is Monday, October 20th. Would you please stand for the pledges? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you very much. Thank you all for being here in person and online. Our next item of business, agenda item 2, is public comments. And we have one blue card filled out. If you want to speak in public comments, fill one of these out. So Mr. Jerry, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. First, thank everybody for their service to the community. The North Harris County Regional Water Authority needs to continue making progress on building out the 2025 distribution system as efficient and effective as possible. We recognize the difficult challenges of multiple projects being managed by the North Harris County Regional Water Authority's team to bring surface water. We must stay the course. Let's start recognizing the obvious. We have come too far to turn around now. Enhance our plans and strategies with practical common sense solutions. Move with purpose and vision. Support your team with realistic expectations, clear goals, and objectives. Allow your team to do their job. The North Harris County Regional Water Authority is at a critical impasse and does not need any unnecessary self-inflicted problems like damaging important relationships. Find ways to work with the Harris-Galveston subsidence. We believe that this endeavor is a cooperative effort between the North Harris County Regional Water Authority, water users, the MUDs, and their customers, who pay the bulk of the user fees that pay the cost associated with surface water conversion. This cooperative effort includes education and communication to all customers. Your customers expect the authority to meet the mandated mission we have all been paying for all of these years. Accomplish the mission. Disincentive fees are not an option. Get the job done. We must stay the course. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's no other public comments. Next is agenda item 3, workshop on the North Harris County Regional Water Authority's Water Master Plan.
Thank you, Madam President, board members, and public. First, I want to apologize for not clearly describe what the Water Master Plan is in our announcement. So I received quite a few questions on what is that and what do you try to do tonight. So it's apparently not very clear in the water industry, and especially for engineers. When you say water master plan, everybody knows what that meant. But for people who doesn't work in the water industry, probably it is not easily understood. So what is a water master plan? I will let the expert talk about that later, but just in a nutshell, any entities to accurately project their budget, they need to have better projections for population growth and demand growth and so forth. And that's what basically is what the Water Master Plan is. And it takes special skill sets to do that. And we were very fortunate to have a role who has that capability. And for the first time in the authority's 20 years history, we are now conducting a water master plan. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Amber and Jessica.
Okay, well, good afternoon. You want to go ahead and click on slides. And we're going gonna actually turn off the front lights because we've got a lot of different figures that are gonna be shown on the slides. So I wanna make sure that y'all can see them clearly. We tested it with the lights on and it looked way better with the lights off. So that's how we're gonna show the slides to you, but if at any point in time y'all have questions as we're walking through this, please stop either Jessica or myself, and we are happy to answer questions as we go throughout the presentation. The presentation does have a lot of content. We're here to give you the preliminary results of the master. I'm Jessica. So Jessica Fritchie has joined me here. I was gonna introduce her in a second, but I'll introduce her right now for you. So Jessica actually is a water demand and water planner that works across the country. She has done projects throughout Texas, but also across the country, both for wholesalers and retailers. And so Jessica was one of the key instrumental people on the team to help us with looking at our demand projections, which rely on our current water usage and understanding that very well, and then trying to assess how might the area grow so that we can map out our plans accordingly. So Jessica will be presenting on that, and I'll give you kind of the bookends for, I'll do the bookends of the intro and then at the end of the presentation. And so we're here to do preliminary presentation to you all. And normally I like to come to you all once I have a draft report written and we're all the way to that point in the process. But we really thought it was important to come to you all right now with the Water Master Plan, because this is going to have bearing on the recommendations that I'm going to come to you all on the CIP that's coming up. So I want to make sure that you all understand where these are coming from before you get the CIP in front of you and are saying, okay, why is this project in here? What is this about? So we want to talk about that with you all. It also is very important for, you have a rate consultant that is doing a rate study. And the demand projections from this master planning effort, and then also the corresponding CIP projects that we're recommending that you need to meet your future growth and future conversion requirements, all of that needs to funnel straight into your rate model. So it was very important for us to build, to get to a point in the master plan where we have the data pretty well flushed out so that we can put it into the rate model so that your rate consultant can get their rate study done to bring you back recommendations on rates. So that's why we're coming to you now before we have the draft report ready, and just so that we can get it in time for your rate consultants, that they can do their magic. And then we can also talk about it when we come to the CIP workshop next month. You all have seen this graphic before. I presented it to you all, the project life cycle. And we have lots of projects that come through that you all see. But before we get to a project, we have the 5-year CIP that you've seen. But even before that, we want to do a master planning phase, really, before we get into the CIP. That master plan needs to have, it's the foundation for everything that we do, and that's really gonna be the focus for tonight, is that master planning phase. It's gonna talk about the long-range projections, the long-range, how are we gonna meet these conversion requirements? And you wanna make sure that all of these projects, your 5-year CIP, and each of your individual projects, that they all have that same focus in mind. That you don't wanna build a project now, that in the future you need it to be bigger 10 years from now. We don't want to rip a pipe out of the road or have to build a second pipe right next to it. We want to try to size things appropriately now. So that's why you're going to look master planning and look long term. So the kinds of questions that we ask during the master planning process. First is just what's the basis for what we're planning? Why are we doing this? And what are we trying to keep in mind? Very importantly is for us to understand how our customers currently use water. So we want to take some time to assess that. We want to look at how the area might grow and how it might change over time. That really funnels into number 4, which is how much water do we need? So it's based off of their current usage of water and then the projected growth to see how much more will we need. And then what infrastructure do we need to deliver that water? Because we need to make sure that we have the pipes, the pumps, the storage tanks, all of that in the right places so we can deliver the water where it needs to go. And then lastly, what everyone really at the end of the day wants to understand is just how much is this going to cost for us to complete the 80%, like 60% and then the 80% conversions. So we're going to start first on just the authority's basis of planning. And the one thing that I'm showing up on the screen right now is actually a snippet from your enabling legislation. And it actually requires that the authority does long-term water supply planning. You do this in your participation in Region H, that Mark chairs and Jude is on the board of as well. So we are intimately involved with the regional water planning process. You adopt a drought contingency plan every 5 years. But the item that I wanted to call attention to for you all is number 2 that's up there, is that you're supposed to be looking on a 10-year, 20-year, and 50-year horizon. So that's the basis of what we have put together for you all that we're going to be showing you. We will be showing you where are we at right now, where do we need to be in 10 years for 2035, where do we need to be in 20 years for 2045, and then all the way out to 2075, what does that look like? So that's why we have such a long range projection on what we are doing here tonight. And then we all are well familiar with subsidence discharge requirements. So you had your 2010 initial conversion mandate that no more than 70% of your water could come from groundwater, which is the 30% conversion system that was constructed. We're currently in the process of your next milestone, which is the no more than 40% of your total demand can be groundwater, and that's 60% conversion that we keep talking about. Then the next milestone after that is no more than 20% of your total demand can be groundwater. So that's the 80% conversion that we keep talking about by 2035. So those are the milestones that are still at play in the current regulatory plan and what's currently proposed in, they haven't put out a new regulatory plan yet, but what they're currently discussing. So next step in this process, I'm going to turn this over to Jessica and have Jessica walk through. She spent quite a bit of time looking at how the authority's customers use water and trying to project out then how do they currently use water and how might that water usage change over time based upon how growth might happen over time. Either way.
Can you guys still see mine in the way coming out right here? Okay. Alright. This works. Okay. So, I'm going to try to strike the right balance here of information. There's a lot I can tell you. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much information, the details, but I don't want to gloss over it either. So, please feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have a question, if you'd like some more information on what you're seeing on the slides. Let me start with that. So, I've been doing this about 20 years, and, you know, we have really kind of simple methods that we can use or really more complex. And here we landed kind of a little bit in the middle. We try to kind of get some complexity into it. One of the things I've learned over the course of my career is the most important thing is getting water use that's happening now accurate in the model. It's a really important step, especially as we can get data cleaned and get it all pulled together. That's really important. So that's a lot of where our focus is today, and we'll show you what that looks like. And also, it's very difficult to explore a range of projections. There's a kind of famous quote out there that says, all models are wrong and some models are useful, right? We want the model to be useful, okay? So then sometimes a range of projections gives you kind of a cone of uncertainty to give you information. So that's one of the places where we're moving towards. And then lastly, there's some statistical methods out there. I'm going to get into it a little bit, and I don't want to bore you with it, but we did do some fancy math, and so I'll show you what that results.
Just before you go to this slide, come back to that slide. I want to point out to the audience that the book, the picture, the book there is also by Jessica. And Jessica is a nationally recognized expert on
that. Okay, so this is the term you're going to see in here, so I want to make sure that you guys understand what it is. It's SPU, or Spatial Planning Unit. We're going to use this term, okay? This is your study area boundary. This is basically the authority's boundary. This is in a shape file, basically. And essentially what we did was figured out how to divvy up the service area into polygons, the boundaries, spatial boundaries, so that we could create a forecast, right? So mostly that's going to be mud boundaries, right? Mud boundaries, utility boundaries, but then a lot of space in between. There's plenty of areas where there's no mud boundaries, and so those have been grouped together. We use a lot of different information to pull this together, mostly available from TCEQ, from Texas Water Development Board, and some stuff that the authority had collected. So you're going to see this term SPU a lot. That is the forecasting unit that we have put together for the forecast.
And can you go back one slide, please? One more. I just wanna see the name of books. These are two books you wrote?
The one on the right, Incorporating Climate Change Impacts into Demand Forecasting. The one on the left is actually written by my professor, my master's thesis.
Okay. So
So I didn't know that, yeah. The one on the right.
climate change.
But the same methods that use for climate change is also for water, for anything weather related, so it's kind of a way to estimate how your demands go up and down based on different weather conditions, essentially. Okay. So, spatial planning units, this map shows you how the results ended. There's 391 total, that is quite a large number, okay? Again, most of this represents mud boundaries, utility boundaries, freshwater districts, you know, all of the different utility districts that cross over the service area, study boundary, plus lots of areas where there are no mud or utility servicing that have been grouped, kind of mostly by zip code. Those are kind of what you see in the northwest category there. But again, the colors we don't mean anything here, it's just showing you the distinction, and all the results you can see there's a lot of maps. All the results are going to be by these spatial planning units. So to start off with, what we did was looked at, oh, yes.
Yeah, just a second, you go back. What are those colors? What do each one represent? I don't see a legend on here.
No color, you know, we could do it that way, I could show different muds and different colors. This is just to show the distribution, there's no color code.
Okay, the related question is, when Harris Galveston does things, they include all the surrounding counties. They're doing what they can to include it, especially Montgomery County. So why was that not included here?
I think here what we are concerned with is just, your GRP participants and your study, your boundary, right, your authoritative boundary. That's what we care about, is that growth that's happening in that water that's being used now and projected into the future. Okay, so this shows, and you know, for each of these SBUs, we can identify whether or not it was currently a GRP participant. So this is showing you a color-coded map, okay, who are your GRP participants. The areas that are not colored are not meeting the criteria, they don't have enough water use, they might have single-family homes on wells in some of the areas, so there's some conditions of why they may not be, but this is your GRP participants, there's 209 across this boundary. And next, we have the groundwater in the GRP, so this is being compiled from the OPRS data. And so you can see, this is the water use, and you can see kind of where it's spread out up to Tomball, much higher water use up there and up towards the woodlands. In total, current groundwater use in the GRP is about 69 MGD, or 25 billion gallons.
So how far back in time does this go?
Good question, sorry I meant to mention that. So this is average, basically, so this is about a 3-year average.
Okay.
Roughly. We don't have 3 years of data on it, so some of it's a 2-year average, some of it's a 3-year average. And then this is the areas that received surface water in 2024, right? We updated this is expanding, this is growing, but this were the areas received surface water in 2024. One of the things we took a lot of effort to do was see which muds were selling water to which muds. A lot of that goes on, so you have some folks who are buying surface water, but they're selling to another neighboring mud. In total, there's 65 that are receiving surface water, 2024 either directly or through a purchase agreement, and the model is accurate at about 28 MGD. Again, that's the average use, the 28 MGD is 3-year average. And these are the totals. So this is the totals for groundwater and surface water and alternative water. You can see what you saw on the 2 slides there, 69 MGD, 28 MGD for surface water, a little bit of alternative water, either reuse or some import surface water, totaling about 2 MGD. So in total, 3-year average is just under 100 MGD of water use total going on, so it's hitting at a 30% conversion. Again, that's for up to 2024 data. Okay, all right, so let's think about how the area is gonna grow. It's gonna be the next step. All right, we got water use established, let's figure out how many people are out there. And we'll start off with looking at the existing demographic conditions. So I want to to talk just a little bit about the data sources that we use. There's lots of census data out there. We collected all of that we could get our hands on. One of the great things that we did is we used Zonda as a sub-consultant on the project. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them at all, but they have mostly been in the business of advising school districts and hospitals on the growth that's coming in their area. They have a really fantastic database on housing starts that they maintain. So they're really good and accurate in about the 10-year projection. I'm going to show you what that data looks like, but we relied on them to put the projections together, and they use their housing starts database to project the growth in the short term. And then HGAC, Zonda also did the projections for HGAC, and they have the projections by traffic analysis field that go all the way up to 2017. So we use those as a fill-in for the remainder of the growth. This is a view of Zonda's data on the single-family housing trends. This shows you the brighter green color, these brighter green are active subdivisions that are currently being built, and then the yellow dots there are future subdivisions that are going to be built. In total, of the last 10 years, there's been 36,000 single-family homes that have been constructed across this boundary, and you can see there, future lots of it is at 21,000, so a lot of growth coming, a lot of development underway. This is the single-family side. And I want to make one point. You can kind of see where these are distributed. A lot of these are up by, that's Grand Park, up around the Ground Parkway, right? You can see where the growth is kind of coming, on the northern portions of the service area. And here we have the multifamily housing trends. And so over the last 10 years, according to Zonda's data, there have been 20,000 apartment units that have been added. And there are quite a few here in varying stages of planning. But in contrast to the single-family housing starts, the multifamily housing is kind of really growing where you currently have, water service, so where you're delivering surface water now. So again, this data gets into the 10-year projections. This is data that they use in the 10-year projections. A lot more multifamily going on, right? And that's another trend that you can see there. So just briefly want to talk about, okay, well, we have to get these housing starts and then the data projections. We started with the existing 2020 census. We added in the no starts, the future lots, and that makes up our short-term growth. And then we filled in the growth on the vacant parcels using the HGAC projections and looked at the trends moving towards the outer areas. We had to do some manual revisions, quite common, especially with the sort of, study boundary this large. We had to go back and make sure everything was making sense. Made a few revisions where we had some population sort of data that were better. And then one of the things that we had to assess, we had to look and say, is there enough population going to be residing here because we're more in mud, a little bit of mud here? Because there could be additional single-family homes that are developing, so we had to make some assumptions around that as well.
Ma'am, when you go back, and a couple slides back, when you talk about future plans, is that based on is the future based on current applications for subdivisions, or is it based on your data that's coming up here shortly?
It is based on, I think the word would be applications, I don't know, it's based on,
Okay.
Requests for subdivisions, parcels being purchased.
Okay.
Yes, and so that, the bottom line there tells you kind of like where the data
Oh, I
is
see,
at.
okay.
Have a snapshot of what it looks like, but yeah, it's subdivisions that are actively being developed.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, that's not mine.
I find it odd that, well, I see where Cypress North Houston is and North Eldridge to the right of it, there's 3 yellow. What is that, or whatever shape that is. It's weird that, like, that's been developed 50 years ago. And then up by 2920, there's no dots there. I find that kind of odd.
Well, there's a lot until you get to Ballard, and then it stops.
But there will be future growth.
Oh, there
It's just
certainly will
weird-
be.
Oh, yeah, there
It's
will
just
be.
weird how there isn't anywhere that you would expect it, and there's 3 dots where I'm sure it's already built out, so it's kind of odd.
Which color are the dots that you say?
The 3 yellow ones to the, by Cypress North Houston and
Right next to West Willowbrook Mall.
Yeah,
So it's like-
kinda weird.
It doesn't, and this map doesn't tell you like if it's like small, could be something super small, and some kind of infill. Yeah.
But, cause I expect a lot of growth right over there in the west side.
Well, and it's coming, that just doesn't necessarily mean that it's been.
Yeah. Okay.
Idle, I don't know if that's the right word for it. But you'll see that in the projections, that it is in the projections.
This will last 10 years.
Back up, that same slide, figured enough, yeah, there you go. So, how are existing subdivisions that are effectively not growing at this point represented on this map?
They're not here, not here. They're in our data, but it's just not here. This is just showing you a snippet of the zone, the database, and the type of things that they're tracking. Okay, so, this is a distribution of 24 household population, all right? So you can see where most of the population is concentrated here. In total, we're estimating about 750,000 people residing across this study boundary. Of that, about 610,000 are served, that's a GRP participant, they're served by an entity that is a GRP participant, right? So the remainder then, of those two numbers are, they're really small subdivisions or trailer park homes or just single family homes that are not required to be a part of the GRP. In
So they
total.
would have an exempt well status.
Sure.
As far as our definitions of wells.
Yes. In total, about 250,000 people residing within MUDs or utilities that receive surface water from the 24. So that's what the numbers are showing us here. Okay, so household income is well known to be a key driver in water demand. When you have areas of higher income, they typically so we match household income. We're gonna come back to this in a little bit. We can talk about some actual mathematical relationships here, but I wanted to show what the income looks like. So overall, the median household income across the whole area is about $100,000 per home on average. But you can see there's some higher concentrations of much higher income families, Woodlands area, and then off to the Cypress again. All right, so, just looking to see where, this is another big impactor of water use, right? Are you a single family home or a multi-family home? Because you're using much different water. Especially on the outdoor side, right? With less persons per household typically, there's lots of different characteristics there. So we're taking a look at the household distributions across the area. So single family household distribution, in total, there's about just under 200,000 single family homes. About 160 of those are in the GRP, GRP participants. Multifamily is a much higher percentage, 59,000 multifamily housing units, but about 50,000 of those, or a higher percentage of those, are GRP participants. The next I'm going to show you what the percentage of single family households look like.
Yeah, help me out with the legend on this one a little bit too. So you're saying that within each of those color-coded areas, that's how many single-family units there are? And related to that, how does different size of your blocks matter?
Oh, it matters. Yeah, 100%. A bigger block is gonna have more space for bigger homes, yeah, for sure, yeah. And it also is highly related to population, right? It's the same thing with population, right? It's the same concept of population. And single family, you're mostly single family out there, right? You're, 3/4 single family population, so it's highly related. The next one though does show the percentage of homes that are single family, so this is a little bit of a different view. This doesn't matter in terms of polygon size. So most of these areas are between 90 and 100% single family. But there are some concentrations, especially where you're currently providing surface water, that have some higher concentrations in multifamily. And again, this is just showing you that the data, yep, it's all checking it, right? We saw that in on the data where the multifamily housing starts are, now you see that there's more concentrations of multifamily housing units. This data actually comes from the census. Okay, next one then, we wanted to look at density as well, larger single-family lots, especially if there's a large amount of irrigation that goes on, have a larger water use per capita. So we looked at the single-family parcels per acre, and so here it's kind of the opposite of the color scheme. The lighter the color actually means it's a larger lot. Okay, so these are areas with larger single-family lots. So again, more dense development, the data showing that it should, more dense development along where you're currently providing surface water, and larger lots, more sprawl as you move towards the north and the west. Okay, and then we have jobs density. So here you can see big standouts, of course, are Tall and then the Exxon over campus over here. Some higher concentrations down in Jersey regional. Overall, much smaller percentage of jobs to population, 278,000 total, 220,000 votes were served in the region. Okay. All right, so now let's start looking through some projections. This serves as the basis for water demand projections. This is a typical way in which we can get to what is our future water picture. So here are the projections for the area, and I'll show you, I've got a map that just shows population and it kind of shows it at an increase. But these are what the totals look like. Again, you see that total population at about 750,000. The region is really projected to hit build out around 2045. You can see there's not a lot of growth between 2045 and 2075. That's just a 20,000 additional people, right? So it's really building out around 2045. Of that, and then hitting 1 million people, this part of the county is projected to hit about 1 million people by 2045. And of that, the population of the GRP participants, again, growing to about 920,000. Households has a similar ratio. We looked at some data to see if there's some shifts in housing size. But there's really, your evidence actually shows that your household sizes would stay relatively the same as they are now. The job growth is not as pronounced as the population growth, which just implies that as the region continues, it's going to continue to sprawl, right? People are going to work somewhere else and have communities here. Amber, do you want to make a note about that? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I was just wondering what population numbers were being used. And when we took office a few years ago, several of us, population at that point was about 760, 780, something like that. And so you say it's actually gone down in the past 2 or 3 years, and maybe that ties into, I think it was Harris Galveston had an updated study that showed lower population growth than what had originally been forecasted.
I don't know the number that you're referencing. I know that this is the best accurate estimate for what we're showing as the service area for the current population residing there based on up-to-date information. I don't know if the previous one was a projection or not. I'd be happy to look at it, but I don't.
And the only other reference point that I would offer up is looking at what you had projections in your 2014 GRP for the entire service area. So there was, this would be for the, related to that population. So the number for 2045 in your 2014 GRP was about 800, I wrote it down. So you know what, I like to bring you guys numbers. 870,000 was the number versus the 1 million being the growth. So that's about a 15% increase by 2045 in total population for the authority's boundary.
Say there's like this acceleration post-COVID here, it was in those parts of Texas. Okay, all right, so keep these numbers in mind. Let me show you the population growth here. So the scaling on the bottom left is going to stay the same. This is going to walk you through so you can visualize what the growth looks like. This is the growth in absolute value, so total population growth between 2024 and 2035, that's projected. Combo's got a pretty high number of growth here. They're in the 6,000 to 10,000 range in this image here. This does align pretty closely with their master plan as well. So let me show you what the overall projection growth looks like. So this is 2024 to 2035. Okay, now we're 2024 to 2045. We've seen some areas highlight, some higher growth, especially up by Waller and Tomball. And then here's to 27. Right, so some additional growth there. Waller even picks up more. Tomball grows by almost, I think that number's around 21,000. Tomball growth overall.
So, there's a hot spot out here, of course, just north of Hartford.
Yeah.
So, what is that, why is that little hot spot being projected there? Any idea?
There's actually growth that's happening. I saw an article just the other day in the paper, Memorial Herman's building a hospital right there. I think everybody wants to go to Buc-ee's out there, off of 290, that's right about where it is.
Is it down or is it?
So right out there, Memorial Herman is citing a new hospital right there. And if the hospital's there, they see that growth is coming as well in that area.
Must be for Dyken, I guess.
Is that
In fact, it is out in that
Fairfield,
area.
the Fairfield subdivision, is it,
Not
No,
familiar with it.
that's farther out than Fairfield.
it's further out?
Yeah, it's even farther out than Dilrose. It's out, most of that's just farmland right now. Which is why it surprises me. Cypress is way down here, and about halfway down the map.
Cypress is about here.
Yeah, that's that other hot spot.
And some fill in between Tomball and.
Yeah, almost the exact same question, except the not quite as hot spot on Spring, because most of that's built down.
It would be interesting to look at and drill down in the data from Zonda, how much of that might be multifamily that's still projected in that general area? Because that's kind of that nexus over, at I-45 and 99 is roughly where that is.
All right, so the next thing that I have is showing job growth. Again, you can see some concentrations of it, some job growth concentrations along the This is 35 and 45. Now these numbers are smaller, by the way, these numbers are smaller. And then okay, so some key takeaways on the growth. Projecting that the population is going to reach 1 million by about 2045. That's really close to build out a little bit of additional growth past there. That's an additional 250,000 people over that time, over the 20-year span. Some of the growth is going to be within existing meds, so we track that. Some of it will be existing meds, some of it will be annexations of existing meds, some of it's going to be in currently undeveloped land and the farm ground that's currently out there. Jobs are going to grow, but at a slower rate. Kind of start to picture some of these sort as well. Okay, so translating this into water. So if, I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with the GPCD calculation, that's gallons per capita per day. The basics of it is that we take water use, how much water are you pumping or receiving in surface water, what's your total water use, and you divide that by the population that you're serving, right, the homes that it's going to. It's a very standardized calculation across the industry. And it's accounts will vary very significantly. It's normal for it to have a very wide range. It's dependent on how much economic activity is going there, what kind of specific conditions are going on. So there's lots of it that can drive a GPCD up or down. And really they're not great to compare against each other, but it's very useful for forecasting. And so we took the water use that we had and we took the population that we knew was falling within these boundaries and calculated the GPCD. So this is basically you're seeing your GPCD for any public water supplier. Okay? Some of them are not in the GRP, keep that in mind, right? There's some really small ones that are not in the GRP. This is anybody who's registered as a public water supplier. We've compiled a database that includes all of your data for groundwater participants with OPRS and surface water deliveries. We've also gone out to Texas Water Development Board. They require any public supplier that serves, I think it's, we have 500 connections connections is really small. If you start more than 500 connections, you have to report your data. So we compiled everything, we want the full picture. So this is showing you those GPCD calculations. The really dark one is greater than 300 GPCD, the lighter colors are 60 and kind of fill in between. So there's some white areas, right? That's where there's no, we didn't identify if there's any public utility or mud servicing those areas. Those are likely homes on wells. So in total, the weighted average that we came up with across the board for the GPCD is at 155. This is very normal, very typical range for gallons per capita per day. But there's a good range, you know, amongst the SPUs that we looked at. We also just looked at those that are receiving surface water, just to see what they're, you know, to see if there was kind of a higher number. And it is. Surface water is a little bit higher at 170. SPUs receiving surface water have about 170 gallons per capita per day. So this becomes the basis of our forecasting unit. We can do some things with this, we can adjust it, we can assume it to be up, down. This is average, right? So we're going to show you average projections based on this GPCD. So we maintain the unique GPCDs for each of these, and we're multiplying them by the population growth to get our future population.
Just curious, did you get into the why of the surface water being higher than the overall average?
I didn't look specifically at it. I am curious, but I didn't look specifically at that. There is more economic activity down there, and so as you have more jobs, naturally your GPCD goes up, right? Because there's people coming in and businesses using water, which is dividing it by your resident population, right? So that could be one of the reasons.
So, and I live out on this far end, so to give you where the part I represent. So most of that area is a good distance of that big white area on the end is the vast majority of that's just farmland. They do pump a lot of water. Is that included in any of these at all? Okay, so, okay, thanks.
That's not,
Yeah, it's not part of the GRP, so we did not factor in anybody, they're not part of our permit. But you are right, that agricultural uses do pump water.
Okay.
okay, so let's see what it looks like. We're gonna take you back to the current water use of the GRP. This is now. Just like with the other maps, I'm gonna show you what they look like, how the water use is going to grow. Again, keep in mind, we made some estimates around, this area is gonna grow, is it going to be enough for it to be a mud, you know, or will it be more significant homes on wells? We had to make some assumptions around that. And then we also looked at the total water use to say, did it meet the threshold of, you know, between 5 and 10 million gallons each year. So here we are at just under 100 MGD in current, which is the 2022, 3, 4 average, right? So let's see how this grows to 2035. Back, show it again. Okay, 2035. So you saw that area around Parkway Pop. So intensification around Congo. And then this is 2045. Okay. And there you can see some additional there. All right. And this is at just at about 138 MGD estimate. And then we go to 2075. Right. And then we have the population projections that popped out by at the top. So kind of following the same population as we would expect. So we're at about 140 MGD. Should these population projections hold true and the water use patterns kind of hold true, by 2075 we'll be looking at about 140 total water use that we expect to be registered. All right. Okay, so we did do some sensitivity, and we have some more work that we can do with this. Typically, we want to start with our baseline projections. We'll call it baseline projection, which just means it's built on the trends that we see now, right? It's what our current conditions show us. But we did do some sensitivity, and we can do some more work on this down the road. So the drivers of water use are very well known. They've been studied since back into the 1980s. And so we kind of, when we start studying this, we want to kind of try to identify what we can, what are the major drivers. This is a lot of data, you know, across those 300 plus SPUs. There's a lot of data. So we did get some things to tease out. That's what I want to show you what those are. We're starting with historical water. You know, you have a hot, dry year, your water use is gonna go up, right? GRP, groundwater pumping is gonna go up, your surface water delivery is gonna go up. So we took a look at the historical weather from 1970 to 2024. This is 23, but I should say 24. And it turns out that the 2011 drought here was the hottest and driest in recent history. That's normal in Texas. I assumed it would be as well as that across any place I've worked in Texas. It's been the 2011 drought. It's been the most severe in history. The blue line there is temperature, and you can see it was really hot. And then the darker blue line is the precipitation. You can see that it was really dry, right? So it's both a hot and a dry year, okay? So kind of keep that in mind. By the way, we pulled this data from the Houston Health somewhere on here, but kind of pretty good history of data that we can rely on. So, okay, this is where it's gonna get really mathy and geeky. I'm gonna try to stay a little bit high level here, but we pulled the sample of 11 months in water utilities and have really good data that went all the way back to 2010. So in order to understand what the relationship is between weather and water use, right? How much can you expect your water use to go up when it's hot and dry? We have to have a database. We have to go back to the hottest, driest year, which we could do. So we pulled that data actually from Texas Water Development data. They have monthly data all the way back to like the 1970s. So we pulled that for a sample of muds and utilities, and we included Jersey Village, and we included Tomball, a handful of muds that have been around for a long time. We do some work to convert to natural log, and we do some regression modeling with GPCD. We're just trying to say, okay, how does gallons per capita per day, water use per day, on a monthly average, how does it go up or down depending on the weather? Because we convert to natural log, we have some special properties for these numbers, and I'm going to show you what those look like. So we had pretty good results. We had statistically significant coefficients for temperature and precipitation. These are what the numbers look like. Positive for temperature, as temperature goes up, water use goes up. Negative for precipitation, so if it rains more, you have less water demand, okay? So let me tell you how to interpret this. So a 10% increase in average maximum temperature, you can expect to have a 9% increase in GPCD. Okay? In precipitation, I specifically pulled the August 2011 numbers here so that you can think about how that looked. In August, average rainfall is about 6.5 inches. In 2011, we got less than a half inch. Really, really dry, right? So we could expect, using this model, the water use would go up by 18% in that month alone, okay, so much higher. So what we did, we used this math to come up with changes in GPCD if there was a repeat of the hot and dry conditions. This table here is showing you the results. Amber's going to reference these here in a bit. So she's using this in some of her CIP modeling. So we can use these elasticities. We just basically input the 2011 data into it and spit us out some numbers. So annually, you can see at the bottom there, if you have a repeat of 2011, we have about a 10% annual increase in water demand, total demand. That's both groundwater and surface water, depending on how you measure those. But the really telling thing is the increase over August, the summer increase. That's showing you that really comes on actually like in 1 month, right? The summer is really where you're seeing a really high increase in water. All right, so we did the same kind of process. It's a little bit different whenever you're looking for demographic drivers. So we did the same, we did a similar process. This time we have to do a cross section. So we basically said, okay, let's see if we can see any demographic conditions that are statistically explaining changes in water use. We saw that some GPCDs were kind of high, some were low. There was a big range. Can we explain it? And so we did find that a 10% increase in ratio of employment to population would increase by 1%. That's what you expect, right? That makes sense. And you know, a 10% increase is a pretty small number talking about a ratio, right? But the bigger one, the stronger elasticity was income. So we did find that if areas grow and there's, you know, a 10% increase from the average household income, that would result in a 4% increase basically in water use, okay? So these are good statistics that we can do some sensitivities around and say, okay, well, what if this area could grow at a higher income or a lower income? What would be the outcome of our performance? I think that is my last slide. If you guys have any questions.
Keep pushing through.
All right, so Jessica's talked a lot about where are we at today and how might the area grow, how might water demands grow over time. Well, now we need to actually pull that into the master plan and then think about your infrastructure based on these water demands. And there's really three things we need to look at, and they each have different things, different functions in what we do. So one is your annual average usage. So you've seen her show up here right now. We're at 99 MGD annual average between groundwater and surface water. Well, okay, that's the number that you're regulated on with subsidence district is annual average. That's what your rates. You look at what's the annual water usage going to be over the year. So we also need to though look at and consider seasonality and what water usage looks like over those seasons. Jessica showed some of that elasticity that happens over the summer and the higher water usage over the summer. We'll look at that for a minute and how that translates into a max day demand for the system. And lastly, we need to look at an hourly peak. And we need to understand how do our customers, the MUDs, use water and request water of our system. And then how does our system respond? And we need to make sure that if the MUDs want the water at the same time, and they all open up their flow control valves, which is the equivalent of everybody turning on their faucets, well, do we have enough water, enough pressure, enough storage, enough pumps to make sure that we're going to maintain minimum pressure in the system? And so we need to double check that throughout the process. So let's talk first. Let's look at your averages, and the graph up here that I'm showing you actually is if we're using average weather conditions, these bars that are up here right now, the dark blue bars, this is your total water demand. So exactly what Jessica was showing, but let's just project it out over time growing. So that you've got, here's that 2025 number that she was showing, here's that 2035 number she was showing, and then here's the 2045 number, which is getting close to 140 mg. And this is just surface water and groundwater and doesn't include the other alternate water, which is another couple of mg that we add into this mix. So in terms of growth over time for this, so what you are seeing right now, the blue bars is average weather demands. The teal green color that we have here, this is what your required alternate water from the subsidence district. So you have, starting in 2025, so the first 11 months of 2025, you're at the 30% conversion, and then you go to the 60% conversion starting in December. So then from December 1st of this year until November 30th of next year, you have 1 year to be 60% converted over that entire time frame. So that's what's built into here. Each one of these, that would be the 60% conversion for each of the years, is what you see here. So this black line right now is your projected CIP as we are currently have it phased and where every project's at currently, and this is what you've seen in that OCC chart. This is really just another presentation of the OCC chart. What's important to notice here, you're going to be a hair above your required, and so you should have you earned some over-conversion credits last summer, and you should, or last year's permit cycle. You should earn some this permit cycle, which we reconcile at the end of this year. But then starting in 2026, we know we are not yet 60% converted. We've been talking about that. So you'll be under converted. So this is how much you're supposed to be converted. This is where you're at. So this right here then is just based off average weather and the expected growth projection. This is without showing you the band. I'm just showing you one of the lines, which I would like to show you the band of it. But this is then the projection for how much you will be under converted and how it looks over time. So you'll have 31 and 35 coming online, you'll have 37 coming online, you'll have 39 and 40 coming online, and then that will round out your 60% conversion. So your 60% conversion right now, hopefully they plan to move a little as I talk so much with my hands. Yeah. So your 60% conversion right now, we have in 2030 is when 39 and 40 will be coming online, so you'll be fully converted by 2031. It'll happen in this time frame. And then your conversion, then you need to start working on your 80% conversion. I'm going to show you what that looks like, but up here I want to just show you on this chart. So the intent would be that you need to by 2035. So in 2035, it always looks weird because 11 months of the year, you were under the old one, and then up here is what you'll be at the 12 months of the year. So you will be right at the conversion. And what's not shown on here is your alternate water, which is another couple of MGD, which is the imported water and reuse. So that's in the 2 to 3 MGD range. So that gets you to your 80%. And then you just need to sustain 80% converted all the way to 2045. So that's the conversion plan that we set out for the master plan, is how do we achieve this timeline to make sure that we've got you converted by 2035. That was the goal. Yes, sir.
Quick question, and I may be wrong here, but just the blue bars, they look like they're increasing linearly. I thought population was more asymptotically flattening out.
So for right now, because you have a significant growth that's happening, I mean, you're talking about almost if we're currently at 100 and you're going up to 140, so that's what, a 40% growth there, right? That we're having over time, from now until 2045. So that growth that's happening over time, we did just evenly space it out because we were only looking at it by the decade. And in this plot, I have to go and figure out when does each project come online to show you by year. So it's a little bit harder. We don't have each year what we think is going to happen, because our goal, our mission was, we really looked every 5 years and where will we be at on a 5-year curve. So this is annual average of what we're looking at, but what also is important to look at is seasonal demands. And so we talked about annual average. So if this is a plot that shows what January of 2022, 23, 24, what the month of January looked like, and that's the same for each one of these months. This orange line here is the average of these 3 together. Same thing for this, same thing for this. So you would just see here's an average. The line represents the average trend from the last 3 years. Then if I just took the annual average of the last 2 years, that 99 number, well, that's right here. So this is the annual average versus this is what monthly average for the last 3 years would look like. And what you can see is there's a seasonal pattern to this. You can see that starting around, and this is only monthly data, this isn't daily data. Daily data gets even more granular and has even more peaks to it. But what you can see is that in June, July, August, September, October, several months of the year, you're exceeding your annual average. So your original 2014 GRP, or your original 2010 GRP really, was conceptualized around, let's hook up lots of people and try to stay around this annual average, and then just let people use their wells for all this time. Well, and that was fine when you were looking at a 30% conversion, and it even works under a 60% conversion. But once we start saying an 80% conversion, the volume that's up here, that you would have to then fix the rest of the year and make up for the fact that you're not giving water to those, that you don't have enough water to give to these people. If you planned around annual average, you'd have to connect lots more muds. And now you're talking about going all the way out to Hockley, all the way out to Waller. You're talking about connecting very small wells in order, it is very inefficient for us to try to find people to connect for that 80% conversion. So what we're currently recommending to you all is that we need to be planning for the people who are connected to the system, that we can get that seasonal peak, that we can provide water for the seasonal peak. And we want to make sure that we can give them water in the summertime. Otherwise, we're going to have to shut off. In 2075, it's the equivalent of shutting off your 2010 system. That's how many people we'd have to turn on and say, nope, you're not getting water, and then find other people to give water to, is what we figured out the other, 7, 8, 9 months of the year. So it's a big difference for what we have to do. So this is one of the fundamental planning recommendations that we have coming out of this, is that we need to be focusing for the 80% conversion, that we can get people water in the summertime, the people who are connected to the system, and make sure we can meet those seasonal needs.
And what happens if we're not meeting the seasonal peaks?
So if you don't meet the seasonal peaks, and let's just say we had all these people connected to the system, we told them we're not gonna have you use water, most of them have backup wells, so they would turn on their backup wells. But then there's that much more pumpage that we then have to convert people for. Because now you're letting them use, let's say, 20% of the year, or 20% of their total for groundwater that we weren't accounting for in that conversion. So it's a vicious cycle of we then have to convert for that pumpage that we're gonna let them do over the summertime. Yes, sir.
So it's not really a water issue, it's a regulatory issue.
It is a regulatory issue, other than, I would say, there might be one or two that it is an actual water issue, but it is a regulatory driver for the 80% conversion. And most folks have wells. We do have folks that have water supply contracts. So those people are kind of the exception, not the norm. So the water supply contracts may not have wells, that we would have to make sure that we can give them the water that we said that we would give them in the water supply contract. But the people who have backup wells, if you didn't have the regulatory requirement, could just turn on the backup well. But given that 80% conversion constraint, this is what now brings us into, we have to figure out how to meet 80%. And to meet 80%, either I need to deliver them water in the summertime, the people who are connected to the system, or I need to get pipes all the way out to Waller and start hooking up really small wells that are very inefficient and not cost effective at all. You're talking about, oh, here's a cement plant I'm hooking up. You know, it's little dinky wells that we're starting to hook up to account for that.
So the 30% that we've been using for a long time, we really haven't been insisting that our surface water users just use it, and that's all that they use. We're allowing them, that's kind of a slack, that's not the right word, but it's, you know, we're giving them a fudge factor.
Yeah.
You can use your wells when if you need them, and we've been able to deal with that. But that slack, or that fudge factor is gonna get really tight.
I'm gonna put
So now we're gonna be,
fudge
so basically
factor.
what you're saying, Mark, is
Yes.
we're gonna have to regulate that the people that get surface water are gonna need to take the maximum amount of surface water before
Yeah.
So-
Otherwise, you're gonna have to start saying, I need to connect that many more people. And if right now it's costing me a certain amount of money, you know, it's costing a chunk of money to hook up every mud. Well, now it's gonna become, like, getting to a mud is a good bang for our buck. Getting to a little cement plant that's on your permit is not a good bang for our buck. And if we can start looking at that, that's a whole nother animal for how much it would cost us to connect them up to the system. Ah.
That raises the obvious question of all the stuff we have right now. How much of the total water usage is muds versus your cement plant?
I would say if you're looking at total water usage, I can come up with that number. I don't have it, but I can come up with it.
Okay.
I'll come back to you.
Fair enough, fair enough.
I mean, I think by a volumetric perspective, it's not that much. I would agree. It's probably not, your smaller wells on your permit aren't that much, but they're out there. But if you're gonna let people that are on your permit pump, I mean, you're talking about in that, remember August of 2023, we were even in stage 2 drought restrictions, telling everybody you can only water 2 days a week. And people still hit 160 mg on average for the month of August. And this isn't even her 2011 August, which has that 30% higher factor. So, you know, our recommendation is we need to plan around the people who are connected to the system. Let's get them surface water. And we did the math, by the way. I wanted people to prove it to me and give you the numbers of how many more people would you have to connect, how far do you go, how much more would it cost? And it was more costly to start spreading the pipes out that far to make up for letting people during the summertime turn the wells on. So because North is so geographically spread apart, which is different than some of the other muds, or some of the other regional water authorities. Some of the other regional water authorities have a different strategy because they're not as spread apart as we are.
If you put our current plant capacity up there,
Oh, you're getting to my next graph.
there you go.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, David. All right. This is our current supply capacity where we're at right now. We're at 144 mgd. In theory, this was in your GRP said, oh, this will take you through 2040 is what your 2014 GRP said. So 144 is what's on there. And right now, based upon there's more projected growth in the area than what was originally in the GRP, and then we need to get folks to take water during the summertime so that we can meet our 80% conversion. We have what we in the water planning industry call a supply gap. So that supply gap is about 20 MGD through 2045, roughly. And it goes a little bit higher as you get into 2075, which who knows what's gonna happen between 2045 and 2075. But that being said, right now we are looking at a supply gap of about 20 MGD. Supply takes a while to figure out. I don't know when you started on Northeast. In 2012. So 2012, when we're still working through getting the second phase of it up and started. So it takes a while for us to get supply sorted out. So this is something that is crucial for us to try to work through soon. And this is something that came about in the master planning. And in fact, we've already started looking at some of this. So your service area, so the blue is the 30% conversion. Green then is the 60% conversion system. And you don't see it on here. We got 31, 35, 37, 39, 40, you're out there. So that is your 60% conversion system would be blue plus green. Well, now we're starting to add in this yellowy orange kind of color, which on my screen looks orange, but up here looks yellow. So you've got this yellow color that's being added in, and there always was a vision to keep expanding the system out. So what we are looking at for options to fill the gap. Well, the first option would be your contracts with Northeast. So you can go and let's find 20 MGD of water and bring 20 MGD of water to the system. So that's what these first three options are about. Let's get us 20 plus MGD of water. So first option could be let's get more water out of Northeast. And maybe that means that we are contributing to the next expansion when the city decides they're gonna expand the plant again. And then we kind of get it and bring it over, and then once we get it to the system here, push it all up into the system now. Second option that we talked about a couple of months ago was the return flows plant and the concept of that. And that was where we were gonna go and capture the water that we have imported in via loose bayou interbasin transfer. We're capturing that water once it gets discharged out to either Spring or Cypress Creek. And then we build our own treatment plant. So we're not reliant on somebody else, but to build our own treatment plant, so we actually modeled out all these different options. To build our own treatment plant, we would need to build an off-channel reservoir to take water. If you ever walk out past Spring Creek right now, or Cypress Creek, it's pretty low right now because we haven't had rain. And that's exactly when we need the water. So you would have to build an off-channel reservoir to store the water and skim it off when you have the water stored there, and that's what then feeds your water plant. So all of a sudden your water plant got much more complicated if you are going to do a return flow plant. But that's an option that's on the table that we're considering. Next option that's on the table is, you mentioned Montgomery County. Montgomery County is on the table. NHCRWA actually has built out their surface water plant. It's up there on Lake Conroe. It has space to be expanded. They have changed the landscape of what they were doing for GRPs and future water supply up there in Montgomery County. That's part of that settlement that they've done with everybody up there. Do we buy water from NHCRWA? NHCRWA is just right across the creek with their water. Could we get water from them? Well, we'd have to pay them to expand their plant and do some extra piping and pumping to get it to us. So those are all conversations and what we are currently evaluating right now. But the bottom line is, we need to figure out where we would get you more water. So, and where does it go in the system? You see the little arrows that are up here right now. Wherever we would put these arrows would require us to lay out your future pipes differently. So this is the whole concept of the master planning with the end in mind, that we want to make sure if we're making a decision, if okay, what's the best decision for you all is to go with additional Northeast, then we would lay out the pipes kind of like how you see on the screen. But if we figured out that, oh, getting water from NHCRWA is actually better because we're pumping it from elevation 150 or 200 down to us versus going from Lake Houston that's elevation probably 50 up to us, well, that might be a better option. So those are things that we're trying to evaluate for you all so we can give you a recommendation and bring that to you all soon. But we do need to figure out what that looks like because it impacts the layout of your system long term. The other couple of things that I have up here, just concepts that are out there, they're policy decisions from you all. If you all were interested, some entities choose this. Looking at conservation, some entities have invested heavily in trying to drive additional conservation and see how you can get that 155 GPCD that Jessica showed, how can you get that down? And if you can get that down 10%, does that gain you enough water that you don't need to build additional supply? It is speculative to put all your money into conservation, and you would have to do something to drive conservation, either at a policy level or at a straight consumer level. Second is an expanded reuse program. This is something you all do, highly incentivize reuse already. Is there a different way to structure that program to incentivize it even more and drive more participants? Is there a way to go out and try to advertise that program more? So those are things that are speculative options for how to get water, versus the top three are we know we can get water by building something. Yes, sir.
So looking out to the west again, I believe it's Montgomery County, in Waller County, and Montgomery County is planning 2 reservoirs in Waller County to feed Montgomery County. So what keeps us from putting a reservoir on Spring Creek in Waller County?
So in order to build a reservoir, you would have to prove that you have the water rights to whatever you are damming up. That's like part of the fundamentals of what you would have to prove. So for anybody to get the water rights, they also have they do water availability modeling at a statewide level, and they figure out every drop of rain, is that drop of rain claimed or not. And so my conjecture would be, there's really not a lot of places you could put a water supply reservoir. I do know that they're looking at flood control reservoirs up there. I didn't know about water supply reservoirs up there, but maybe.
Okay.
So flood control and water supply are 2 totally different. You want one, you want empty, one you want full. So totally different. But in terms of the actual, so you're not wrong though. That's exactly the concept of what we would be pitching off of this return flows, is that you would build some sort of, oh, here's a 500-acre, Lake Barker out there, 500 acres that people can come and fish, and that's the water supply that you're skimming off of Spring Creek or Cypress Street. So that's the concept of your return flow plant, is you probably wouldn't dam up Spring Creek because that would have potential flood impacts on it, but you would do an off-channel reservoir for it.
You ranked, any wild figures on how would you rank those first 3 as far as probability or?
Probability?
Well, probability, okay, feasibility.
I get another contract with City of
Yes.
Houston, woof. Contract with NHCRWA, woof. Build our own, but have to permit a reservoir, woof. None of that. They all have pros and cons to them, right? They all, you do have existing contracts with the city, you know what you're getting into to get additional water from the city. But to get additional water from the city, you're pushing it into a system to push it all the way up here. That's not as efficient as if you were able to get the water where you need the water, and that water could also help you if something were to happen out here different from what we are planning. So right now it's about investigating, what those options might. There's pros and cons to all of them. None of them are the magic silver bullet.
Could you just go back to your 155 chart, because it's 1 or 2 that one.
Oh, this one? Okay,
Yeah. So if we're pulling 144, if everybody stopped using well water in the summer, we'd be good through 2035 with no further expansion.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So 2035, you're fine. Once you, and even once you start to turn on that 80%, you're gonna be right on the hairy edge. You probably have, and once again, to
Yeah.
Director Ramsey's point, I did a straight line projection, so.
Right.
This could look up or down as far as how growth is gonna happen, and it also varies based upon the weather, like Justin had said. So what isn't factored in here, and what we wouldn't recommend is, we're not recommending to you all to plan around the worst case weather scenario. We're not recommending to plan around hot and dry conditions for the system. What we would recommend is at least plan around the average weather, that we're getting another 20 mg of supply. And then that over conversion that we had on this chart over here, let's go back 2 charts. This little over conversion that we've got here, this is your non-rainy day fund, your drop day fund, that is gonna help you when you have those drought conditions that Jessica's saying, okay, people are gonna use a lot more water. That's what's gonna help you is those OCCs for those conditions. So let's not get too much water, but we need enough to make sure that we can still make those hot summers, that we still have enough water for everybody.
Are we gonna have OCCs then, or won't we use them up in the next couple of years?
You will use them up in this time frame, but here is when you would, where there's a gap between the dark blue and the teal green, you actually would be gaining OCCs in this time.
I see a way that we don't have to have any odor conversion triggers. And that is we change our fee structure to penalize groundwater for being pumped over surface water being delivered. Right now, we give them a 50-cent discount for pumping the groundwater. If we reverse that, give them a 50% surplus for pumping the groundwater, those numbers would stay in that bank.
I do think we could actually potentially tease that out of the model, what that would look like. We have done that before as far as rate impacts. Did we look at the rate one? And tease out a coefficient of it?
Because we know for surface water users how much groundwater they use.
So we can go and look at the data and try to draw a correlation. I think some people absolutely are gonna say, no, I'm not gonna pump. Other people are gonna say, I don't care, I want my water, my grass to look nice.
Yeah.
Let it rip.
Mark likes his green grass.
Even property value issues. Amber?
Yes.
Let's see, one slide forward.
Forward,
No,
okay.
that one, well,
There you go.
yeah. Back up.
Okay, back up.
There you go, perfect. Okay, let me ask you a little bit different. What would it take, and I'm not saying how you get there, whether it's intentional, accidental, bad projections, whatever, but how much would the population change have to be, projected population change have to be down in order to not have that supply gap? And I think very closely related, how much of that 144 will we really have?
That's a whole nother can of worms to open up on how much 144 we really have. Because that's predicated on everything being fixed up and buttoned up in the existing plant and making sure we get our whole 144 out of the existing plant and the new plant. But I think that's, June to strong arm the city, we get that 144. So in terms of the 144, okay, so in terms of the first question though was population. So, you know, you are projecting that growth that's happening from now to 2045 of, I think it was about 250,000 people was the number that you were citing. So if you had less growth, if you only had 100,000 people instead of 250, there's probably a number to look at that. So the unfortunate thing is that right now is the time critical, unfortunately, to make this decision to look forward on. It's easy for us to not pull the trigger on adding in a new mud or extending a water line out because, oh, we have plenty of people connected and growth isn't happening the way it was, so we can defer a project. Those things are really easy to do. Supply is gonna take a decade to get done. And so if you wanted to hedge your bets on what's gonna happen on population and you got to a point where you couldn't pull that trigger to get additional supply, you would be in a bad position in terms of not have anything to fill that supply gap. And then your answer is just let people pump their wells.
So how many years do we have to make that decision?
6 months. My honest answer, 6 months. If it's gonna take 10 years for it to come online, I think you've got 6 months to make the decision of which one of these options makes the most sense, and to then start vetting that individual option. So I think you've got to, I don't know how long it took to get all the contracts negotiated on Northeast. You're amending that contract with the, whatever, 6th, 7th supplement, and getting another supplement on there, that's gonna take time. It would take time for the city to then, you know, they wanna do the expansion. SJRA would be a brand new contract, because they're not doing contracts the way they did with the GRP, so that one would be a brand new contract that would have to be worked out. And then if we were doing the return flows, that's one that we need to start studying it to figure out how much water can we actually get out of Mountain Channel Reservoir. Where would we build it and how much water can we get out of it? So unfortunately, we have to make a decision relatively soon on the supply because it's such a long lead time to get it done.
Yes,
I got a question for June. I guess it's been about 6 months, 8 months ago, you mentioned that we had put in a rule that we own the surface water returning to Spring Creek. How did that turn out?
the application is still pending in NHCRWA'S.
What do we think is gonna happen? Do we have any idea what's gonna happen?
I think eventually we will get some, but the city of Houston is in the way, per se. There are some negotiations to be done.
Because that's the one we have the most control over, right? Over all these plans I see here, that's probably the one that we have, if we own it, we have control over it. If we don't, then we're at the mercy of San Jacinto or Houston.
Well, like Amber said, all three options has ups and downs, right? For the city of Houston, the second supplement does give us the right to trigger the future expansion.
Sorry, to what?
To trigger
Okay.
the future expansion. And it's gonna be much more costly, and also like Amber said, we are pumping up against the elevation. So the operational cost will be higher. So from that standpoint of view, it's less desirable option. The reuse, yes, once we get the approval of TCEQ, we control own right. However, again, as Amber pointed out earlier, it requires a much bigger landscape to build the basin, to store the water, right? And that's not easy.
That's where the Spring Creek comes into San Jacinto. Trying to remember the last time I flew over it, how much open land there is out there.
Yeah, that's why we, even several months ago, a couple months ago, I requested the board to authorize me to issue an RFQ to look into it. But we haven't issued the RFQ yet because I was waiting for the study to see which option would be more appealing. And then lastly, the NHCRWA, again, we are at their mercy to enter the contract. But the advantage is they are the highest elevation.
Yeah.
They can pretty much flow down to us. But we have a major hurdle to overcome, which is SGIA have to get the city's consent to serve us. They can't just enter a contract. So all three options has its own difficulties, and I'm pursuing all three of them. By pursuing, exploring this one.
There's another option.
Yes, sir.
Bring in water in from out here. There's another option. From Warner County.
From who?
From who?
Yeah.
From a well.
So the only wrinkle in that is that your enabling legislation actually prohibits you from buying land outside of Harris County for the purpose of water rights and getting groundwater. So that would be the only wrinkle, is you couldn't purchase the land and purchase the well.
There are purveyors out there who are offering water to be supplied and distribution. Very expensive.
Very expensive, and I don't know if they got 20 MGD.
But you can go out pretty far if we're gonna own. If that's an option we wanna consider, you can go pretty far out in Harris County and be able to put a big well in Harris County. You get out towards Waller, and you're a ways out.
Well, we wouldn't be able to pump in Harris County, right? So that would count against us.
That counts, yes, that's right.
So this isn't an unheard of thing. A lot of folks in North Texas are looking at that, at how do they go and get water, and they're looking at groundwater importers and people that are offering, hey, my water's over here, I can pump it to you, and then we can pump it up to the Metroplex. People are looking at that in other parts of the state. I personally haven't heard of anybody in Waller County that's marketing, but that doesn't mean that there aren't people that are out there that are doing it. Yes.
I'm sure it's some product price, like direct partnership that we do.
The price that we have listed in here.
My question is related to that, not exactly the same, is what about, let's say, Lone Star Conservation or some similar other county conservation districts? How would they play into this? If we were to have a well field, like, say, San Antonio, to get some of the water up in that northwest part of the county in particular?
So, I don't know where you'd be able to put a well field that someone else doesn't already have the claim
Well,
to the
let's
water
say
rights.
we can negotiate that.
Yeah.
Well, San Jacinto can drill wells out in, Waller, and we can buy water from San Jacinto.
I don't know of anything that would preclude them from being able to buy something out in Waller and bring it in. So,
People are doing it all over the state. Setting up consortiums to buy land or water rights.
Well, that's why in this past legislation, we actually had a bill that tried to prevent groundwater infiltration. So by the time we decided we wanted to go that way, number one, the cost is very high. Two, maybe prohibited by law.
That's true.
and there's all kinds of other things we could sit here and sprinkle onto this list that are hypotheticals that other people are looking at. I mean, there's others, it's just they are, this is the lowest hanging fruit. That is the most certainty to get a supply.
Do we have enough time to, I know flood control is looking at massive tunnel that could be combined with resource storage. Is that something that's close to feasible?
Yeah, so I've had in-depth conversations about this, with Levy Flow Executive Director. So it's the whole, in stormwater management, you wanna get it out as quickly as possible versus, so you wanna get it out of the tunnels as quickly as possible. Get it across the city. You don't want it to stay there for us to pull it and then use it for water uses. So that's part of the dynamics that would be at play there. And same thing on a flood control detention basin. So the detention basin, the whole goal of the detention basin is to store the water and then drain it back out as soon as that storm is gone versus we need the water when it's dry and it's not there in that basin. So where do you put it? And there's people who have looked at doing ASR, you could sprinkle that on the list. ASR has complications in this area, that Subsidence District's position on that, which is aquifer storage and recovery, which is what San Antonio does. That's where you're taking water and instead of storing it above ground in tanks, you're putting it in a bubble under the ground and storing it under the ground. And it sits there in a bubble and then you eventually pull it back out and you pull it back out. But you have to have the right to where you're putting the bubble. You don't want somebody else to come and take your bubble by their own wells. There's different complications to it. Subsidence District studied ASR here, and right now, the position still is, if you use it for a long-term storage, that it would likely impact subsidence as you are withdrawing it out. So, short-term, you could potentially try to come up with something feasible, but long-term storage, which is what you really need. You need long-term storage for when it's a drought. You don't need it, like, from
And
August to
long-term
September.
is 6 months, a year, 5 years, what is long-term?
I would say probably a year to 5 years, yeah, maybe longer. So you're really trying to, get yourself water so you can have it for the opposite of when you get. So I know that there's different things, people have talked about related to even stormwater ASR, but you've got to clean up the water before you put it in there. There's a lot of those, a lot of other, probably 20 other concepts we could talk about. Direct potable reuse, there's people out there looking at that. There's all kinds of stuff that people are looking at for how to fill the supply gap that we could broaden and investigate. But I do think that our recommendation is that you need to make a decision relatively quickly. So if you wanted to talk about any of these policy type things, we could. If you wanted to investigate some of these other things, we could. But I still think that we're in that time frame of, my recommendation would be in the next 6 months, you want to pick which one, pick your horse, and let's focus on that, because it's gonna take a decade.
That's good, we still have still slides.
Okay?
Could we explore, asking for a change in the regulatory structure to be able to determine, so we can determine whether or not slightly more groundwater usage would harm the aquifer or affect subsidence?
That's probably take longer than any of those options. If it's even possible.
Well, I mean, should it be explored? That's the question.
I mean, we can explore every possibility we can think of, right? But, I mean, we have to list an option and pick what is the most cost effective, what's most feasible. And I would say that feasibility of that option is based on the history of the subsidence district. Oh, yeah. No, his predecessors changed the laws, yeah.
So just recapping those water supply rent stations, we talked about the additional supply to make sure that we can get those seasonal peaks under average weather conditions. If you've got these OCC credits that you've accumulated, once you're starting to build that 80% system, that's what you're reserving for hot and dry weather, or variability, or unforeseen conditions. I think it's also very important to monitor annually what's going on with your OCC projections, your annual demands, and making sure you understand compliance with the conversion requirement, but also, when can you pull the trigger to slow something down in that CIP if you wanted to? You are making a projection for 10 years out. Is there something that we would say, hey, wait, you don't need this online for a couple of years, let's wait a couple of years. So those are all things we want to monitor annually and adjust your CIP accordingly. And then lastly, it's prudent in any master planning effort to go back every 5 years and revisit those projections. What has changed that none of us thought about? You know, in the 2014 GRP, nobody thought, they thought about it, but couldn't really conceptualize what's gonna happen as Grand Parkway comes in, because it hasn't been built yet. And what's gonna happen as ExxonMobil campus is started. And now we know that a little bit better. So in 5 more years, we're gonna know more how things are going with growth and when we visit things. Yes, sir.
One other thing, I don't know I don't know what the regulations are between DOT and us, as far as, the DOT is about to widen in 2920, starting next year through 2027, all the way to Wall. It would certainly make things simpler to put our water in their easement if they would allow it.
TxDOT normally does not like us to put our water pipe under the road.
TxDOT's a tough one. The county is a great partner when we ask to go in their easement. TxDOT, not as easy of a partner. So let's talk about the actual, what infrastructure do we need to deliver the water? And so this is, remember I told you there's 3 different ways we want to look at how the water gets used. This is kind of that third leg of the stool of what we're looking at, is your daily demands. And for a retail provider, this is super important. You gotta make sure you're doing fire flow and whatnot, and it's very important for a retail provider. But even for us as a wholesaler, we have to make sure TCQ requires us to maintain a minimum pressure in our system. If we're gonna drop below that pressure, then we have to issue a boil water notice if we lose pressure in our system. So it's very important for us to understand, how does our system react when all of the muds are trying to get water. So what you're seeing up on this screen is kind of a scatter plot of the month of October 2024 and something called the diurnal pattern, which just means the daily pattern. That's what diurnal means. Kind of the opposite of nocturnal. So diurnal pattern here, and this is just what's people's behavior throughout a day. And this, if you start thinking about it, it shouldn't surprise you. Folks start turning on their sprinklers in the morning, and then the mud tank needs to fill because people are using their sprinklers. Then everybody's up and taking showers, and they're doing a load of laundry and running their dishwasher before they get the kids off to school and run to work. So you've got a big, huge peak that happens in the mornings. I would say largely more than 50% of our water is from, this is an estimate, she didn't actually verify this, but I would wager more than 50% of our water is irrigation. So this isn't surprising. Why I'm using October 2024 might seem kind of weird, but we wanted to make sure to look at a month when Northeast was fully running, both our pump stations are fully running, and everything was working properly. And 2023, we didn't have Northeast, and we didn't have the Rendell pump station up and running. So now this is us looking, this is your combined, this is what your system is doing at both pump stations. So this is the net effect of all of the MUDs turning on their water supplies and asking for more water in the tank, their surface water supply. So you oftentimes get another peak at the end of the day as everyone comes home from work and does the same behaviors, you're giving the kids baths, whatever, before bed, so people tend to use more water at the end of the day. So what this means, we have to make sure that the system can sustain this peak, this pattern. And we actually look at patterns at the MUD facilities too. So we want to make sure that the pattern that everyone uses water, that our system will maintain pressure when we turn it on. So that means pumps, tanks have to be sized in order to maintain that pressure. Yes?
So did y'all look at the option of changing the curve?
Well, we looked at lots of things related to that. Wish you were in one of our workshops. We spent hours talking about this and looking at this. We looked at what if the MUDs changed their operating window, how much of their tank, because their tanks are supposed to be reserved for fire flow and meeting their own system demand. We dump our water into the top of their tank. They give us an operating window in their tank. We looked at what if we were able to negotiate with the MUDs to get us a bigger window. It didn't drop the peak by that much when we did the modeling of it. We looked at, so there probably is some room for us to better figure out how the flow control valves turn on and off at each individual MUD and kind of optimize that a little bit better. There's probably some room there that we could gain, but it is very typical for a system. If we don't have elevated storage tanks, which we don't, all of our storage is happening at the pump stations on the couple of tanks that we have there. So it's really meeting whatever the system demand is. This is actually normal that you would see TCEQ, if we didn't have data, would tell us to use a 2.85 peaking factor, and roughly your data works out that way. That's what they would tell us to use for a peak hour factor. Peak hour versus average day. So we did, I'm not going to show the thousands of slides of modeling and all the different scenarios and all of the different things that we ran through, but try to encapsulate it in these, say, dozen bullets that are up there. On the existing system and 60% conversion, we went through and validated all your as-builts and made sure what was in the model represents what was actually constructed in the field. Sometimes it's just a hypothetical pipe that was put into the model and never got validated with as-built conditions. We went through and inserted all those demands that Jessica developed down to the SPU level and assigned them to water receiving facilities. We applied diurnal demand patterns to each of those water receiving facilities and the overall system. We actually went out in the field and for several weeks, and some of you might have had some phone calls about some leaking pressure loggers, but we put pressure loggers out in the system to try to monitor what was going on in the system, because you can build a model, but your model is only as good as the data in the actual field. And you want to calibrate that model and tweak things in the model to make it represent in-field conditions. So we performed a calibration effort with pressure loggers to do that, looking at SCADA data and your data from specific energy. After we had all of your existing system put into the model, we added in all the planned CIP projects in every water receiving facility. We've got 80 more that are coming online between now and the end of the 60% conversion, so let's put all those into the model and what they're gonna look like. We then went in and modeled growth through 2030 and looked at the 60% conversion and the timing of everything to see, all right, when we turn on everything for the 60% conversion, unless you have growth that's happening in the system, all right, can we sustain those peaks? So that's what we did for your 60%. Yes, sir?
You said you went up, you looked at the storage capacity, changed it by 20%. Is that what you said? that been already said?
So, I didn't say that number, but we did look at that. So we looked at the end receiving facilities, what if instead of 2 feet, they gave us 4 feet, or what if they gave us half a tank? So we looked at terminal storage at the MUDs, if we could convince the MUDs to do that. We also looked at if we had more storage tanks,
Yeah.
could we offset storage for that supply shortage? So we did look at that, and no, the answer is no. There's not enough tanks out there to build. You would have a tank farm to try to offset the supply shortage. So, but the tanks absolutely help you meet that peak. And those are important, and we do need to make sure that we have the right number of tanks out there so that you've got enough water to last you during the day. Because if Northeast is only sending us a certain amount of water, we need to push out that peak that's happening. We need to have the tanks there that are storing the water ready for it.
So we couldn't have a big enough farm, but couldn't, if every mud doubled their storage capacity, that would take all the peaks out of the system.
I don't think it would take all the peaks out of the
A
system.
good portion of them out.
Could it reduce your system-wide peak? Yes. What you'd struggle with is how would you implement that? A lot of these mud plants, new mud plants, that's a whole different story. But existing mud plants, I don't know how many of those have, mud engineers have their own plants. There's not enough room. They aren't laid out, because the neighborhood is already built out. I know my mud plant in my neighborhood doesn't have the room for it to have a tank. So there are some instances though where it could be, hey, maybe there's some tanks, but it still won't solve, it's not the magic bullet. It helps that one mud and their one week, but it doesn't help your whole system. All right, so let's talk 80% conversion then. So after we figured out 60% conversion, and I'll show you a slide of what that looks like, we went through 80% conversion milestones. And I already kind of previewed you that with the chart that showed how it was gonna grow over time. So we actually went and did multiple scenarios for 2035, 45, and 75 for your 80% conversion to see how you sustain that over time. We looked at all of those supply options. We actually built them out in the model and modeled all of them to figure out how big would you build the pipes. And if you brought in the water from this side versus this side, how do you change your piping layout? So we looked at all of that. We also looked at for connecting the water receiving facilities. We actually went and looked at what was the most cost-effective water receiving facilities. What's the best bang for your buck? And you're gonna be looking at what's the closest to your system, where's their high demand projections, and then there is a certain minimum amount we have to spend to connect any water receiving facility up to our system. If it's a small little well, we can't make it happen. We also have some constraints when it comes to elevated storage tanks, things like that, so we have to look at the cost effectiveness metric for water receiving facilities. So we established which ones we thought were the most cost effective, which ones are in kind of that category of, hey, if we needed to pull the trigger, we could. And then ultimately determine in-system pumping and transmission, what do we need to do to make sure that the water can flow as efficiently as possible to those water receiving facilities and maintain our pressure. So let's talk about 60% conversion. So you've already seen these colors before. The blue is your 2010 service area. The green is what we have in our current CIP. So right now we're saying just stay the course with your CIP. This will get you to the 60% conversion. So this is looking at we currently have 69 water receiving facilities that are connected. We have 80 additional that are in the works in some state of either starting out design all the way on through. We're in startup and commissioning on some of them. So we have 80 more that are still to come in the system. So recommendation is just stay the course on your existing CIP. We do need to initiate the next planned phase for adding more tanks and dropping in the next pump or two at the pump stations. We need to look at that. And so you're gonna see that in the CIP as a recommendation, because we now are planning for 2030 for when the whole system comes online, and there's growth that's happening between now and then that we need to be ready for. So we need to start getting the next round of tanks out there and make sure that the pumps are ready to go. So, and these were planned expansions. We try to, any of our pump stations like Harvey that we're designing right now, we try to build the facility out for ultimate size and then only drop in the pumps that we need for right now, and then let's drop in more pumps and more tanks as we need them, and try to right size the timing of that infrastructure investment.
What is the status of the Hardy pipeline?
So it's in between, the Hardy pipeline or the pump station?
Well, both.
Okay, so pipeline itself is, I'd say about 90% design, and we're in land acquisition, and we've got a portion of the parcels acquired and are working through the rest of them. So that's, I would say that's kind of in that, design, you would first start design, then you move into land acquisition as the critical path. We're in that land acquisition as the critical path phase of the Hardy pipeline.
Now, are we doing the land acquisition or the city?
So we are the prime, and the city of Houston pays us for whatever their cost share is for the
Oh.
agreement, yes. It did take some time to get the agreement executed with the city, so that project only started a little over a year ago is when that project got started. So that's the pipeline. The pump station is, they turned in 60% submittal not that long ago, so that's trucking along as well. So I would expect pump station to be out for bid next year. Looking at the consultant in the audience. Giving him the eye. Okay, so let's talk about the 80% conversion requirement. So this is, how are we going to get there for 2035? So we've already talked about source water a lot. Once you figure out the source water, you need to figure out how you're gonna pipe it and pump it from wherever that is. If it's Lake Conroe to us, if it's getting it from Northeast to us, is there capacity in the existing pipes or not? The numbers that I'm showing you actually are with assuming that you need to add, I will show you numbers, they're coming, I promised Director Ramsey it was coming. So we've assumed, I'm not gonna say worst case scenario, but we've assumed that you're gonna have to construct new transmission and you have to fully expand any of these facilities, that you can't buy capacity from other people. Those are all things to think through. Well, so you've got the, once you get the water to the system, now you need a new regional pump station to push the water into the authority's service area. So we would, but in order to do the regional pump station, we need to know where the water is coming from. So these are all why it's so important for us to make this decision now, because each of these other decisions hinges on that first decision of where is the water coming from. Then we have to do what we would normally expect to do for the conversion. We need to expand the existing regional pump stations to fill them out. We need to add Tomball in, which is one of the first ones that we want to do going out the gate. We need to get priority infills, which they're kind of hard to see, but you can see some little orange lines off of the blue. That's where, hey, there's some MUDs who have water plants that we only connected to one of them, not two. Let's connect to their second one. Or let's connect to another one that's nearby that seems like they're growing and it's now a good bang for our buck. So we've got priority infills that we would want to launch more quickly. And then the next series of projects, all with these coming online in 2035. So that's kind of the timing and what we need to accomplish for 2035 for the conversion. Okay? Now let's talk about what do we do after 2035. And what the demand projections are telling us, so what you currently see on the map, the blue lines are your 2010 pipes, the green lines are your 60% conversion pipes, and then those orange lines up there are your 80% conversion pipes if you take water from Northeast. It would look a hair different if you took water from somewhere else. But it would still serve the same SPUs, would be the plan. Well, those pipes, if you see underlying, Jessica showed the growth projections by SPU, well, that's what I have underneath the pipe network. So you can see that while there's growth that's happening out here, that our service area has a lot of growth planned within here. And so our plan would be, size these pipes and everything big enough that you're ready for the growth, that this system is ready to sustain as MUDs add in the next apartment complex or whatnot, that you can sustain growth within your service area, and that you shouldn't need to connect more MUDs after 2035. But this is all predicated on what happens with growth and how does growth happen. We've already identified some, here's your tier 2, you know, if you needed to pull the trigger, here's some other people that you could add, and hey, if we needed to get to Hockley, we figured out how to do that. If we need to get out there, I think getting out to Waller would be expensive. But if we needed to get to Hockley, we figured out what we need to do to the network to make sure that would work. So really, our recommendation after 2035 is just make sure your system is size big enough that it can support the growth. It's gonna happen. Yes?
I don't know if this, if we wanted to deal with Waller, could we give that portion of the GRP to the city of Waller? And they provide their own water as a municipality?
Because they will consider imported water.
Okay, how is it different, I know it's tiny, but how is it different than Houston? Houston does that, why is it okay for Houston and it's not okay for, it's okay for Tomball to have their own system, although we're providing to it now, or will in the future.
No, what I'm referring to imported water is that if you use imported water from another continent, it's not considered by the district as the alternative water.
I think, yeah, okay, I get, okay. I just wanted to think if they remove Waller from the GRP altogether. If we negotiate with Waller to remove them from the GRP, then that means we only have one thing that's growing out to the west.
So they would have to come up with their own GRP, or their own plan for being compliant with subsidence district's rules. I mean, the same is true for anybody in your territory. The way that your rate order and your enabling legislation is written, if people want to get out of the GRP, they could ask for that, but then they're responsible on their own for complying with subsidence district rules. So that's then the downside, is Waller would have to figure out how to comply with subsidence district rules. Yep,
That wouldn't be our problem.
it would be their problem.
So why would they wanna do it? Hey, here's a new problem. We gotta be cheap. Be cheap.
It's possible.
See?
But like she said, there's a lot of, that stretch from Hockley to Waller is
They
about
can't get water.
15 miles. There's a lot of transmission lines you can get from Hockley to Waller, we're only halfway to Hockley.
You're just talking about the transmission line, not how much it's
Yeah, I'm
gonna
not
cost
talking
to
just
pump
the
it out there.
transmission
Well,
line.
all Waller would have to do is drill new wells in Waller County and shut down their wells in Harris County, right? And they're compliant. They're not pumping anything.
I would think that there is something to be said for how they structure, how they get water, and considering that part of Waller is not in Harris County, but is this actually within Waller proper or not? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, if Waller's in the GRP of Silence District, then they have to have wells in Harris County. And all they have to do is close those wells and they have zero GRP and get their water from Waller County, right?
I would think that they could apply to withdraw their people from the GRP, and then they're responsible for their own, which they could potentially satisfy by having a well somewhere else.
And is Waller part of the Galveston Science District? Is Waller included, or is Harris as part of it?
Here's promises.
Yeah, I think Fort Bend is.
So they're not covered under the Science District, so they have a bit more leniency than the rest of the city.
And I do know that Subsidence District did, to Director Ramsey's point earlier, study broader than just the county boundaries. I don't know, I haven't studied what they're recommending in the regulatory plan. If they're recommending, oh, if you're within a certain proximity that influences, does that come in? I don't know.
Quick question, kind of following up on that whole discussion, so explain to me why we couldn't bring water across the county line and import water that we pay for to supply Waller if they shut their Harris County wells down. Instead of bringing it up from, Hockley or further away, why couldn't we just go 10 miles away across the county line?
So in terms of importing water, I think that you in theory could look at importing water. Your constraint is going to be your enabling legislation doesn't allow you to use eminent domain to get property outside of Harris County for the purpose of water rights or a well.
But it lets us buy water, though, if I'm right.
I'd have to look at that, or legal counsel would have to weigh into that.
Okay.
I'm just pretending to be a lawyer and reading your enabling legislation.
I'm engineers do
It's okay, you can pretend to be an engineer too, it's fine. We can both do it.
that. Well, I've done that too.
Okay, so let's talk about, you know, the elephant in the room, how quickly do you get it done, how much is it gonna cost?
Well, real quick about the water thing,
Yes.
would someone need to go speak to?
So what I would wonder is, what I don't know, and we can look at this, I don't know how much water Waller uses. I would be willing to bet it's not 20 MGD worth of wells that they have out there.
No, there's not right now.
Yeah.
We're talking 10 years from now. The Waller County projections are is that, one, they'll have the biggest school district in the world, in Waller County. And that's the projection out 10 years from now,
Yeah.
so. mhm.
And if it potentially worked for Waller, it might be cheaper to go ahead and extend that supply down to the hot river, where we've got a hot spot. Then you might get up close to the 20 inch.
In terms of, options that are out there are other places that have looked at this. And you have to figure out who potentially has that water rights and that water availability, that they could be able to actually sell that water to us. I mean, it goes back to that earlier point of the groundwater marketer. This is essentially a groundwater marketer that is water.
Well, the other potential, do we know if the West is negotiating with Waller?
No.
And the same for Tomball, they could maybe water somewhere else, get out of our GRP, if they wanted.
So Tomball could form their own and make their own, but the question would be, where would they get alternate water from? And SGRA, much like it would take the city of Houston agreeing to allow SGRA to sell water to us, it would be the exact same thing for Tomball. If Tomball wanted to get water from SGRA, they would have to get the city of Houston to allow SGRA to serve on south of the creek. So their service
Yeah,
area is bounded by.
they can drill some wells north of the creek. Shut the wells down on the south end of the creek.
I don't know as far as viability for Tomball. Tomball did recently do a master plan update, and they did their own water and wastewater master plan update. This is actually one of the places where we saw that they had significant growth projected. Their current plan is to drill more groundwater wells in Tomball proper, in Harris County, to serve future growth for the city. So that's Tomball, what's in their master plan, it's online.
So they need to get that approved through John's district.
They would ask the subsidence district to be able to drill a well. Subsidence district would send it to us and say, are you approving this well in your GRP permit? And pretty much for us on wells, there isn't a position to decline any wells that should be covered by our GRP. As of right now, there's not a policy direction that we should be declining. So if they meet the nexus of, they have the minimum amount that is supposed to be included as one of our wells, and they're within the geographic boundary of the authority's coverage, then they ultimately get added into our GRP.
Does anybody know if Tomball runs in Harris County at all? Is there any place where Tomball goes across the creek?
I would think, I mean, there's development across the creek, I don't know if that's in Tomball.
I know it's in Tomball ISD, but I don't know if it's in Tomball proper.
We may need to, come and take a break, in a minute, so I don't know how many slides we have.
So I only have the two punchline slides of how quickly is it gonna get done and how much is it gonna cost. That's it. And then I'm done with my presentation of any Q&A that you would have. Okay, so timing wise, I've mentioned this already tonight, so this is what I preliminarily mapped out, and this is how I would map out your CIP. My goal would be to spread things out as much as you can, bring water online by 2035, and that you are trying to get things, let's start one year, one the next year, just to kind of spread out that debt service so that you can. But what you're seeing up here then is the recommendation for getting the new source water. We need to start studying that now and figuring out what that is. Once you get the source water established, it's gonna take contracting, then you need to figure out transmission. You're gonna need to, once you know the source water, start thinking about siting a new pump station for it. Cause everything's built around where your pump station goes and where you're gonna spread the system out. We need to expand your existing pump stations, that can wait till later, that can wait until you've done expanded. Project 32 is Tombow. This is one that is going to take longer to get done. We met with the city to talk about it. It's one that we actually wanted to start pulling the trigger on soon in terms of the routing of the pipes. As soon as we know which direction the source water is coming from, we think we need to start on routing these pipes because Tombow has a lot of oil and gas pipelines through the whole entire city. And it is going to take us way longer to get through Tomball and clear all of that and get all the approvals to go through there. Not just the construction is its own thing, but just the approvals itself. We've done a much longer extended real estate timeline for this project because that's what we think it's gonna take. And we talked about the
And you can get that done, because Tom Hall got it done to get 249 expansion, but it required Exxon leveraging leveraging the situation and buying the field south of Tom Hall.
Yes. So trying to partner with, and Tomball does have some ideas as far as trying to partner with them, because Tomball, as you saw, has tons of growth. And their master plan even says it, they have tons of growth projected in that area. So they're also looking at, hey, do we need to drill these wells? Can you just get us surface water that potentially we do a water supply agreement with them for surface water instead? So how can we partner with them on it? So they also have plans to redo some of the routes in Tomball, so maybe there's some synergies there that we can work with them.
What's the light blue? The little thing on new pumping, what's the light blue portion of the line?
So I think light blue we need to think about the siting, but I don't think we actually need to start spending money.
Okay,
To me, the dark blue is when we need to start spending money.
Gotcha.
But we need to be thinking about it and start looking at where that might make sense.
Okay.
Because pump stations need to be in the right spot. Here's the bottom line, how much is all this gonna cost still? So finishing out the $3.3 billion is the number I am telling. And this is to finish out the 60% conversion. That number up there is the number I told you last year. It's pretty much almost the exact same number. So roughly 900 million left to finish out the 60% conversion. You already have 800 million of that in committee funds from TWB. So it's only about 100 million left that you would still need, and this is only true from last CIP, for you to get done with the 60% conversion. For the 80% conversion, depending upon which option you pick, they all have different pricing to that. However, we mapped out, modeled it, we looked at what the cost might be for all of them, and costs are within the same range of each other for each of those options based on just looking at capital cost. So we essentially took a number that if you had to spend more to build a big, huge, giant reservoir, you might have to spend less on getting the pumping because the reservoir is right next to where you need the water, right? So there's trade-offs on each of the projects. Some of them you spend more on pumping, some of them you spend more on the treatment and transmission. So 2.4 billion. So what I'm gonna tell you is this number. What I'm presenting to you are future dollars. This is your bond amount. So this is how much the loan would be with that 15% for fiscal services. And then, which is exactly what would go into the debt service then that's in your rate model, right? So, and it also is I assumed a 3% inflation on annual inflation for this number. So I figured out which year are we gonna take out every single one of those contracts for each one of those projects, and when would we need it, and how much would we need each of those years. So it's important because these numbers, I'm presenting it to you in future value and in gross bond amount value, because that's what really impacts your rate. But you need to peel all of that back if you're gonna look at it in present value. That's what your GRP looked at things in present value and excluded a bunch of things in there, so it's missing a bunch of categories, and I wanted to try to present a holistic picture to you all. This is what the all-in number is looking like if I had to use my crystal ball today. Yes, and your graph for you, Director Ramsey. So this is how I would spread out that debt service at each year. So the dark blue then is what is still committed from TWB that I guess it's kind of burnt orange, it's might be Tennessee orange. But this extra orange color that's here, it's not my Gator orange. Anybody wanna be a football coach, by the way? But this orange here is what's still needed for the 60% system, and then this teal color then is your 80% system. So this would be for everything. You have to expand the source water, you have to build transmission, pump stations, all the water receiving facilities, getting them connected. Farther away it gets, more expensive it's getting for us to connect those water receiving facilities. So this right here is what I've given. I've actually given this to your rate modeler. So your rate modeler has exactly this. I've also projected what O&M costs would look like in each of these years and in future years. As we're starting to buy more surface water, I gave them that. So they are actively working on your rate model right now, and I'm plugging all of these numbers in so that they can answer the real question is what would rates need to look like to support this?
So why is 2031 big, 2033 is big, but 2032 is small?
It has to do with the timing of when we start projects and how we budget for it. So design is a certain amount of money, construction is a certain amount of money, and then I budget in the CIP for the last percentage that doesn't get released until the very end of the project. And TWDB, we don't get it from them until the very end of the project. We come bring you those closeouts and you all approve the closeouts, and that's when they'll give us that final 5%. So that's why so each contract, we actually look at every single contract like that to figure out when would you take the money from TWDB. That's how we figure this out. So this is likely because you're gonna be doing a bunch of construction, and then we're back up here, probably looking at it figured out. So you're gonna be you're probably doing some of this construction for the source water is probably one of the big ones that's in there. You're starting design on these. 32, you're probably getting ready to start construction. These ones are probably in land acquisition. This one you're starting design. So it's all, every single one of these has a much more granular, here's how I think the contracts would work, and here's the exact timing of the contracts to optimize that debt, when you would take it out.
So if you go back to the debt.
Oh, yeah.
What, on your end, what could you do between 2029 and 2035 to pushing it or pulling it to get you to where that's a more even keel?
We could absolutely make it a more even keel on debt service, but the way that I would do that in order for you to be online by 2035 means I start projects sooner, which means I need the debt sooner. So this is, for me, kind of what I think is the most realistic scenario of what the authority can manage in terms of when you want to chunk it out. We don't want everything to come online at the last minute, because what if projects have issues? And it's a crystal ball, and Jessica's great, but she's not going to be right. So in terms of spacing out that debt, are there some things that maybe you could get, and this is something every year, by the way, we look at this in the CIP process. Every year, I look at every single, the whole team. Kit's over there, she manages the spreadsheet. So, the team looks at this whole entire thing and slices it down by every single project and every contract to figure out exactly when you would need the money for every contract. When would we get it from TWDB? And then we look at the TWDB escrow account and actually do a cash flow forecast by quarter to look and project out when would we need the money to make sure we have the right amount of money in escrow and aren't taking out too much to put in there, and that you have enough that you can still keep the next 3 quarters until your next closing moving. So that's how this is actually forecasted. This is based off of looking at a quarterly cash flow projection out of your escrow account. Okay. Oh, let's keep going.
Of course, there's more questions. Okay, my back of the envelope calculations say that to do this, it takes another $6 per thousand on top of the 550 or so that we're headed toward right this second.
Probably a fair number.
So we get to, $10, $11, $12. We had some fairly small, I thought, sensitivities, things like rain and temperature. How does $12 a thousand affect that sensitivity?
So $12 a thousand would be tough. I do think that we can model and look at each time that you did a rate adjustment, strip away the weather variable, and each time there was a rate adjustment, how do people respond on water usage? I think that we could look at that. It might not have a strong correlation because you have a lot of variables going on at the same time, but it is something that we could look at.
Go ahead. Part of my point, you've heard it before, is you look at other jurisdictions around the country that have exceeded about 8 or 9, and you start hitting elasticity. Things change completely.
Yep. Okay, any more questions?
When are we gonna get projected water rates?
So the demand consultant initially was prepping for, that January timeframe is what we had said before, several months back, that's what we had talked about. They're trying to aggressively beat that schedule that we can present back to you. So they're actively incorporating this right now into their rate model. And hopefully soon, is that November, is it December? We're working on trying to accelerate that schedule earlier than January, which is what we had talked about several months back.
So how is the West able to do it for half of what we're doing for?
There's lots of things that I could say about the West system that's very different from ours. The spread of what they need to cover, I think their system might have 75 miles in total, and we have 75 miles in the 2010 system. So it's just the scale of what they need to cover and how dense their development is versus what our development is. They're a smaller, more compact regional water authority. They also had water from East Plant as their source water. So they had a different amount of source water in the first place than North had it. So it's just, there's multiple things at play as to why I would say that it's different. And I can't speak towards West how much more they need to invest and what they're gonna do to sustain the 80% conversion. I don't know their GRP rates.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I guess how does this affect, if we were supposed to be going to the subsidence district, it's gonna ask them to push back the dates. How does it affect that?
Well, I think at least you can use it as information for them as to this is how much more we still need to do to get done our system. That's a status update. I would think telling them this is how much more we're gonna have to spend for this 80% conversion to get it done and what we're gonna have to, I don't know that we would have rates ready before the subsidence district to be able to tell them, but Director Ramsey did his back of the envelope of what his numbers would look like.
The projections, was there anything taken into account for overruns? Shifting the schedules out because of COVID, because of whatever else pops up?
So we spent a lot of time trying to validate, as we came onto the program a year ago, we spent a lot of time trying to validate what are all the steps in the schedule and what is the critical path of everything, and how long are the various steps on the critical path taking. So I think we've got a very good handle now around how long certain steps are taking and what is the critical path, so how can we drive that faster. So we have assumed in the master schedule, what we've built there, we've assumed things coming online consistent with how it's been done in the last couple of years. Are there some areas that we could probably try to drive schedule faster if there's more focus on? Possibly. Are there some areas that are outside of your control? You're not gonna get land acquisition going too much faster other than making sure everybody's staying on top of all of those steps that need to happen.
Is there any, can we put together a chart on time delivery? On time projects, how, since the beginning of the authority to now, the percent, what the promise dates versus what they actually happen?
And the costs, initial
And
costs.
the initial cost versus the final cost.
So it would be very hard because there wasn't a program schedule built like that showed every step. Because it's very easy for us to go and look at, oh, an engineer told me they'd get their design done in 60 days. Did they get it done in 60 days? Well, that's only one step on the critical path. After the engineer gets done, well, the engineer is supposed to turn in their meets and bounds with that, at that 60% level. Well, did the meets and and bounds get turned in? How many iterations did it take to review that? How quickly was it given over, did land acquisitions send out as soon as the meets and bounds was ready? Then they're gonna go do the title work to confirm, before they're sending out letters and doing the appraisal. Then they go through the appraisal steps. So there's lots of these different steps. So I think first step is.
Maybe more high level than not so much in the weeds of the.
Yes, well, so I think from a high level perspective, that it doesn't exist. That is where we are moving towards, that we have now built out, here is the critical path and what those activities are and tracking those. So it does exist now, but it doesn't, I can't retroactively go back and create it. I could look at when did an engineer say they were gonna turn something in, when did we actually get it, or when did a contractor say they were gonna do a construction contract versus when it got turned on. But there's always some sort of, there's a story to everything as to why something got late.
But we knew when we were 30% converted, right? We knew that?
So we were 30% converted in advance of the 2010 milestone. Yes.
And so for the 60%, 80%, is that goalpost still moving, like, are you basing all this on future population and?
So it is,
growth?
yes, it is based off of growth within your boundary of anybody who would be a GRP participant. So it is, so growth is incorporated into all of this.
What if you're surprised with 10 new wells in the west part of our GRP? What if 10 more get approved in this, surprising, and now we've got to do more converting? Is that right?
That's the answer. If 10 more, if all of a sudden, right over by Director Barker's house, a big, huge, master plan community is going in out there that we weren't planning.
Probably 3 in the last year and a half.
Yes. So number 4 that we weren't looking at is.
So the Subsidence District is approving those wells, and then we are gonna have to bump up our conversion.
Correct. Correct. That is ultimately, yeah.
So do we structure our contracts with a hard date, or do we do them serially, that we actually breaks it down into, do we look at the next section after we've gotten the first section done, or do we hold the contractor responsible out 2 years to meet schedule?
We do have a fixed date when we need to contract with the contractor, but when they actually construct things, there will be unforeseen conditions, so it could extend the contractor out. And supply chain is another issue. We have a contract when we build a project 25, they put the water line in. Way ahead of the state, but they have to wait for the valve. That's during the after COVID, when the supply chain issue, they have to wait and come back to put the valve in.
So I understand world economic events, but anything local, any excuse locally, oh, the weather was bad, well, the weather's gonna be bad 4 months out of every year, no matter what.
Well,
So-
we did have that argument in the Northeast Plan expansion project. The contractor there argues that it can't work when the weather is too hot, when it's too cold, when it's freezing.
Okay. So they wanna work in San Diego, but they can't, they have to work in Houston. So.
That's part of the dispute. They want more money, they want more time.
How do we vigorously fight those things with
Oh,
finance?
absolutely. Not really.
Yeah.
But we do the same with our contractors. Our contractors, there's some things we're actually working on to tweak the front ends a little bit, to make them a little bit stronger, so that it spells out exactly, here's the rain days that we're assuming, and this is what it means to be a rain day, so that, hey, this is very clear, the rules of the road, and this is what it means to be a rain day or not a rain day. You must include a certain number of rain days in your schedule, and you're signing on for this schedule. And then if you don't meet that schedule, well, there's gonna be a problem. So there will be, there are damages for not meeting the schedule. So I think that's absolutely something that the team focuses on with each of the contractors, and then how do we make each one of our spec packages, we learn from one and learn from another, and here's, how do we tighten anywhere where there's somewhere that we could help?
but for a certain time frame, the rain day is more than what we have in the contract, we have to give them the extra rain days. We cannot deny that. But he couldn't work, because there was, we confirmed that on the FGS, local agencies, but there's extra rain day we have to give them.
Well, I guess my point is, it's not just us that has to take risks. The engineering firms, by their nature, have to take part of the risk. They take all the reward. They should take some of the risk.
Well, that's why we have LDs also, we charge LDs to take care of the contractor. If there's an error in emission, we can actually, we charge to the native firm. And most of the time, even from the option eight, what I have seen in the past, because acquisition was all the time or the issue, to delay the project, not any design.
Well, okay, so then fall on the general contractor. What, whoever is building the system has to take some of the risks, because they're taking all the reward.
This is not designed with contract, this is designed with bill.
So what's the subtlety between design to build and design to build contract? What are the you just said we are.
See, for example, Northeast was designed, you designed, this is what you put, okay, you design and you build it. You give it by a certain date. We have unforeseen situation happen, COVID happened, some rain happened, we give you like, change this or that, number of certain days. But when you design, we had built, design engineer, design the project, we bid it, we pick the contractor to do the job, we pick a contractor for him to construct the number of days we assigned in the contract. So if there's any unforeseen things happens, rain days happen more than what allowed in the contract, we have to give a change order to them, that's in this paper. We cannot deny that, we cannot paralyze it.
Because we didn't put it in the contract, so we did that.
Why didn't we put it on the contract?
I do think you put into the contract that you can penalize them if they're late, but you also put in a mechanism that if there is excusable delay, that you will give them the excusable delay. It might not be compensable, you might not pay them for the extra time, but you might give them the extra time to complete, which does have bearing on us, and it is something that, does the authority look at how we charge liquidated damages differently? That it's not just a nominal amount for extra inspection time, because now you've got actual delays of starting water plants. Is that something, not to the extent of Northeast and the damages there, but is that something to investigate?
We do have LDs amount in the contract, but you have to justify it. Let's say, the contract, you justify that under the claimants.
Okay.
Parker, I want to point out that the delay of our current 60% conversion is not due to mainly the contract didn't finish the project. It's because the project didn't get started. And the project didn't get started on time is due to those reasons outlined in the board in July's meeting. COVID, supply chain,
No, and I get that, I get that there are some things that are completely out of anybody's control.
Yeah.
But there are some things that can be planned for. You can't plan for a pandemic, but you can plan for 30 days of rain in a period of time that you're.
We have now, so the project, after we reviewed why so much delay, we have now given more realistic project schedule.
Okay.
Because originally, if we'll give you an example, originally we may say the real estate acquisition only take a year and a half. Well, when we see consistently the real estate acquisition take 2 years to 3 years, well, we have to adjust that schedule.
Same token, we use TWDB for funding, we have to go to them, they stop things to review certain aspects of the project before allowing us to proceed to the next step. So it's not necessarily in our control, and TWDB is a wonderful partner, we love them, they work great with us, but some of that is out of our control at the time.
Slow.
Yes.
Sounds like we need to get with Elon Musk's boring company and just go under everything. You know? Now, I got a couple of serious questions here. With your modeling, it sounds great. It sounds like something you'd have a lot of fun playing with various variables and everything. And don't get into whether this is possible or not. I'm just saying a what if thing. What if it turned out that we actually didn't need to go to 80%, that the sustainable extraction rate was actually 30%, so that we'd only have to go to 70%, or 75%, or 65, whatever the number came out to be? How much would that save us? And would that, in particular, would that save us that 20 gap that we've got right now?
So I don't know the answer on if it would save us the 20 gap. I'd have to look at what, off the top of my head, it would save you some of it. I don't know that it would save you all of it. And then the question then is, all right, how much of that conversion is for the extra supply, which a chunk of that is towards the supply, a chunk of it is towards just putting the pipes in your system to be able to convey flows. So, and then getting the water receiving facilities all connected. So, I mean, those are easy to quantify, that if you only needed to convert 70% instead of 80%, okay, now I have instead of drawing the line down here, now I draw the line up here on which ones to connect. So that would be easy to sit there and quantify, and I could quantify, it wouldn't take me that much effort to quantify and figure out how much I wouldn't need to get. What would be a little bit harder is it's the modeling of it, where the water's coming from and how we're putting the water in the system. Someone would have to remodel and figure out, oh, now we're only getting 5 MGD here, where does the water need to come from, where does it need to go, how do the pipes need to get laid out? And now you're pushing a little bit of water here and more water up here, what does that look like? That's the part that's a little bit nuanced in how you ultimately come up with the recommendation, which I'm giving you the bottom line, but there's lots of nuance to that. But it's not impossible to make that a ballpark estimate of those things for you.
Okay, the second question, I think, not tightly tied to the first one.
Okay.
But let's say we do everything just by the book, like you just laid out. No changes to it. And forget about where the actual supplies come back, we figure that out. At the end of the day, how much surface level change, and more to the point, damage from surface level change, is that gonna save us? Is it $100 million? Is it 2 feet of subsidence? Where are we getting out of this 2.4 billion?
That's my question. As the 2010 conversion, has that helped us? Do we know?
So I couldn't tell you, I am not a groundwater modeler, nor am I a subsidence modeler in the press model that they use. So I couldn't tell you those numbers, it's
Would
not.
that be important for us to know what difference that has made?
So in theory, the subsidence district had somebody build and USGS updated the model to make sure, oh, here's more zones that influence and what that looks like for the subsidence modeling. I wouldn't know, I mean, what scenarios, I think Intera might have done the actual modeling for subsidence and what that would look like.
I would
That is
suspect-
not my area of expertise, I would tell you that.
I would suspect if there was huge differences in subsidence, they would be at the top of the mountain screaming out rate deal. That's what I would suggest.
Well, the recent, publicly released study shows that if there was compliance with the 2025 and compliance with 2035 and beyond, that there would be X amount of subsidence, let's call it this much. However, if there was no compliance past 2035, there would be 4 inches of additional subsidence. That's what their data showed in a recent report. So that means we're spending $3 billion to save that much subsidence. Is that right?
I can't speak to the subsidence,
No,
it's not my area of
is that what their
expertise.
data shows?
And I can't even tell you what their data shows, I haven't read that, and I haven't read the fine print of what the data shows, and I do like, you know, anything that you read, you gotta read like all the way to the fine print of what's in the back of it.
Well, exactly, because there can be a spin one way or a spin another of
Yeah.
the same data.
Yeah.
I think our general manager should know.
I
If
know.
we're spending $3 billion to save that much subsidence, isn't that kind of bad public policy?
I'm not a public policy expert on subsidence, so that's not something that I would comment on, but.
I think those are all legitimate questions, but I don't think she.
Yeah, she can't answer.
I can't even model groundwater, I don't know. This is way beyond my area of expertise.
But that's what their report shows.
Yeah.
So,
You know, I did not intend to put you on the spot.
No, it's okay.
That wasn't for you, that was for
Yeah, that
us.
was not
that was a
intended.
rhetorical question.
Well,
Point
not
it at me.
entirely
Oh, yes.
rhetorical, it's where we getting for this. Is it worth it? And that's the policy decision.
And Community Impact put an article out in 2023 that showed, that if we save all this groundwater from subsiding, it only affects us by 16%. So what is the other 84%? So we're doing all this work and there's still other things that are causing subsidence. 84% of other things. And they were using the U of H data.
I have to look at the study that they're referencing there.
Yeah, they're using the same data that subsidence district.
Yeah, I think I remember reading that, but question on your presentation, and this is just to clarify, because I think it would be an answer, but the 2.4, 2.5 billion, that's exclusive of the cost of paying those bonds back,
So
correct?
that does not include any interest, that would be principal only.
So roughly double that.
So we're talking $7 billion, $6.6 billion.
Interest?
Is that right?
For how many inches, 4 inches?
Not that much.
I'd leave that to Cindy.
It's almost 7 billion for all this.
But what we haven't spent yet is what we spent so far, plus another 3.6 billion.
And that.
So 10 billion.
Or 6 billion.
9 billion.
Actually, 6.6 billion, I'm sorry. It's what we spent plus 6.6 billion.
And we've already spent 2 billion.
You've done, about 2.5 when you include and that's principal only. For
So we haven't paid all
the
that.
existing system and the money spent to date on this.
2.5.
2.5 billion,
Without interest.
right? Without interest, is that about right?
So then we're looking at 5 billion plus 6.5 billion.
Yeah,
If that math works out, I'd have to, I don't know the.
somewhere in that ballpark. In excess of 10 billion, certainly in excess of 10 billion.
I'd have to do that.
These numbers, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to do
I'd
it.
probably Google that, but.
How many of those, areas that had the jobs were actually just building our water system?
Probably none of them because they were all from out of the area.
Depends on where you're getting your pipe from.
That's right. And where are the engineering located?
Okay, well, that was
I
an
think we
amazing
needed that.
presentation. Thank you,
If you
very
have any other
informative.
questions, let me know. Hopefully it'll help you guide as we get to rate study and, the CIP here coming up.
Can you email us that presentation?
I can, but what I'm gonna tell you is it is draft, it is stamped draft all over it, so don't hold it against me if something changes, because we're not fully done.
Thanks.
much. Any other questions for Amber or Mr. Chairman? Very good. So that was agenda item 3. Agenda item 4 is, board governance planning. I know some of y'all are ready to go, but I move that the board recess into executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code 551.074 to discuss general manager succession planning, communications, and recruitment. And hopefully we're only gonna be meeting for about, maybe, 15 to 20, 30 minutes.
So where was that on the agenda?
Board governance plan.
That doesn't tell me squat. That tell me that we were talking about general manager succession. I
Well,
wasn't prepared to discuss that.
Okay, well, we've got some communication things we need to discuss, and that falls under this. We need to, it also is timely because we need to do it before our November 3rd meeting. And I don't think I'll be back there for, 15, 20 minutes.
I wanna know if it's legit. Communication, how's that legitimate executive session topic?
It is.
Mr. Attorney.
If it's relating to personnel, it would, yes.
Well,
So,
if the personnel is related to general manager, then the general manager does not think it needs to be behind closed door. I don't mind to discuss anything regarding me in the open
It's
public.
regarding communications, and I'd like to go to executive session. We haven't gone to executive
You
session.
can't go to executive session just because you like. You have to have a legit reason to go to executive session.
It is legit reason, thank you.
Andy. Can you give us some input, please?
It would be legit if you're talking about performance of.
Is that what we're talking about? You said I don't know what communications means.
Communications, lack of communications, that kind of thing.
But remember, if you're having a hearing, the employee who is being discussed may waive discussion in executive session.
Thank you.
Have it in open session.
I would like to move to postpone this topic. I
We-
don't
this
know
is-
how the rest of the board feels, but
Well, I'd like to hear her rationale why it has to be done before the 30th.
me too.
Because, there's supposed to be y'all may not know, but our general manager is supposed to be speaking at the, Subsistence District meeting in November, which will be right after our November 3rd meeting. We have no idea where he's going with what he's gonna say. We don't know about the presentation. We have no idea. So I'd like to find out about that if you want to discuss it now.
You need an executive session for that?
And I would add that I did brief the board in the July board meeting and told the board what I plan on communicating with the HGSD. So the board unanimously concurred and didn't need to go ahead to discuss the regulatory relief with the subsidence district. So anything that I will say in the presentation, which is invited by invitation from HGSD, is strictly follow that directive in July, so.
In July, we didn't make a formal motion, we just agreed for you to continue conversations with the Subsistence District.
There is no need for any motion.
I'm not complaining about non-motion, non-motion. I'm saying, we knew you were gonna continue to discuss, our plan to push the dates back, things like that.
It's not pushing the case back. I'm asking for regulatory relief, which there's not associated with state, it's associated with their enforcement. And if you authorize me to pursue that, before I ask for consensus, I ask the board, is the board intention to receive regulatory relief? The answer is yes. And I follow that directive, and I've done exactly what the board agreed for me to do. So I don't know what did I do wrong
Well-
from July to now, all of a
Because-
sudden that I need approval from the board to continue my effort.
Because it would be very nice if you would communicate with the board and let us know what the plan is without finding out surprise, you're gonna be speaking in November at their meeting.
I did in July.
In July, you did not mention you're gonna be speaking in November at their meeting.
Communication is talking to them.
Dude, we've been asking for this plan for 2 years. We've been waiting on our attorney. Wait, we gotta wait for this, wait for the hydrogeologist, wait for the economic impact analysis. We gotta wait for the Subsidence District to finish their 5-year review. Wait. We gotta wait for this letter. Director Ramsey got a letter done in 2 days, 3 years ago. And we've taken 2 years to do what we could have done in 2 days. And now all of a sudden, we're gonna, the West spoke, and now we're gonna follow behind the West. I just think it's poor planning. And I'm disappointed in the lack of communication.
Well, again, I have communicated with the board to confirm that for the very reason I do not want to continue my discussion with HGSD, then come back to face this kind of accusation. And therefore, even though I'm not required to ask the board to give me the go-ahead, I did it anyway in July. And now, if the board said, you don't want me to do that, you can do that. But you will not tell me what I could do and what I cannot do.
We asked you in July to continue discussions with the Subsidence District.
And-
And now all of a sudden, you're gonna go speak to the board when we don't even know what you're gonna be speaking about.
I am going to tell them the reason that's why we need to look for regulatory relief. And that's exactly what I said in July.
And what is the plan for that? Because
The
are you gonna
West
just tell us
speaks
this on
or
November
not
the
has
3rd?
no parallel.
It does
no
correlate. It
relationship
does
to
relate.
us at all.
And does any of this discussion, does the fact that we're trying to discuss what's gonna be discussed at Subsidence District have legal applications that should put it into executive session?
Yeah.
So if this is what we're gonna discuss, and I believe it should be in executive session, we're gonna discuss exactly what June's gonna present from the policy standpoint that we all have, then that should be executive session. Because we don't want this to end up at the Subsidence District before he is at the Subsidence District.
He's already, Mike Turco listens, he's already listening right now. But June brought this up, so he wanted us to go and discuss this right now in front of everybody, so
But I'm
that's
saying,
what we're doing.
and I don't think that is wise.
I don't either.
So how is that legitimate for executive session to talk about the
Then
plan of
that
communication?
is a legal issue, because you're asking for regulatory relief, which is the same reason we spoke about in executive session a year ago.
But it's too late now. So Director Ramsey?
Yeah, let me clarify. So Andy, you think it would be within the law if we're discussing regulatory relief and what general manager may or may not be saying, that could be an executive session?
No, it's different than the personnel issue that was brought up earlier.
It would still apply in executive session?
Yes, if it's on the agenda.
It's not. It's not.
Well, there's
The
the general
governance
clause.
is not on the agenda.
There's the general clause at the top there.
No, I mean,
I don't know why you're so against this.
Why would we want to stop him?
Wait, we wanna know whether we can do it or not. That's the first thing.
Okay, first step.
a presentation of Subsidence District is not on the agenda. So we cannot Can we discuss that in executive session? Because it was brought up as an employee performance issue. Although I think it would be great to discuss it in executive session. And if you would like to do that, I would suggest we set a special meeting in the next few days.
Well, when
to do that.
I emailed the attorney's office, that's the point of this, and when I sent the email, and it was labeled board governance planning.
Right, but that's a personnel issue.
Well, communication issue regarding this, regarding,
I did not, I thought you were bringing up a personnel issue, which is what's on the agenda. But if we're gonna be talking about regulatory relief and, you know, what is actually going to be stated to a regulatory authority that has powers over us, that's a different topic, and I'm happy to put, I like talking about that stuff.
well, it's too late now,
Why? For tonight?
For tonight, but
because our next meeting is coming up on November the 3rd, which is right
You just
before.
said schedule a special
Yeah, so
meeting.
today is,
Okay, so
today's
when?
the 20th, so.
Next week?
Any day, you know, looks fine today. It's fine with us.
I'd like to know if he's ready to give this to the board, so we know what the plan is.
I already told you, the plan is in July. I even presented a presentation on those points that I'm gonna talk to them.
And so why did we get put behind the West? If you've been in communication with
I
Mike Turco,
choose to stay behind the
well,
West.
I'm upset about it,
Why?
because it puts us in a bad position.
It's not.
It does. The West
Tell
came,
me your reason.
the West said, we're following all your rules, we're, meeting all the goals, we're looking good, we love you, Spice District, and now we're gonna come follow up and say, oh, please,
And that's-
give us some regulatory relief.
And that's the fact, the West
We've been-
has said all along, they do not need the relief. They are perfectly fine to meet
Well,
the conversion
We've
requirement.
been asking to do
They
this for
did
2
not
years.
support.
So,
I didn't do that for 2 years, so don't try to pin that on me.
I'm not. Jordan
Okay.
Ramsey,
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to, I don't know, I don't recall if we have to vote on the motion on the table first, I don't think we have to. But I'd like to propose.
I'll withdraw.
Okay.
If we can't do it legally, for the executive session, I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, and propose that we have another special meeting next Monday to take this issue up with the proper agenda that allows it to go into the executive session. Actually, that doesn't need a motion, if we just kind of agree to it. Just need proper notice to the public.
Well, anybody, supposedly anybody at the board can ask for us.
Okay, I'll ask.
Well, there's two of us that have to have a special meeting, right? I'll join.
Okay.
I'll join.
Oh, okay, right.
You need a second.
Yeah, I think it says that 2 board members have to request it. So,
Yeah, I think you're right on that. So, Kelly, you and I formally requesting this?
I guess that could, well, I mean, I don't have.
I mean, I
to
agree with you.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's me or anybody else, but it's gonna happen anyway.
27th?
Is this enough notice, Andy?
Yes, sir. If we post, tomorrow, we can have it.
okay,
so let's do it.
I withdraw my motion too, then,
So we're effectively postponing this discussion until Monday?
yes, which we should have done in the beginning, instead of starting
It'll be
to
in a
hash
different
out.
form of the agenda. It allows it to go to executive session.
Let's have what I did.
That's it. Next, agenda item 5, the next meeting to be held Monday, November the 3rd, 6 P.M. Well,
Except-
that's our next regular meeting. And, if there's no further business, we will be adjourned 8:48 P.M.